So what if the only difference between you and like the wealthiest, most successful people in history wasn't money or education or even luck, but just a single intangible impulse of thought?
I mean, that's a proposition that completely upends almost everything we accept about how the world works, especially right now.
Right, exactly. Because we are taught, like almost from birth, that success requires endless physical labor. You look at modern hustle culture, and the message is always just,
Put your head down, grind, trade hours for dollars.
yeah, work the 100-hour weeks. But today, we're going to explore this really radical idea that riches, and really any monumental achievement, actually begin with a state of mind. We're looking at the premise that your own thoughts might be the literal mechanisms standing between you and your ultimate goal.
And we are exploring this through the lens of one of the most foundational texts on personal achievement ever written, specifically focusing on the introductory concepts of mind power.
Hmm.
It's a deep dive into how a very specific type of mental architecture can physically alter your circumstances.
Yeah. So for anyone listening who is, navigating the world of business, trying to build a startup, or just fundamentally wanting to change the trajectory of their life, this is for you. You are about to learn how a burning desire backed by absolute persistence isn't just motivational fluff.
Right, it's not just a poster on a wall.
Exactly. It is a functional tool. Mastering your own thoughts and completely reframing how you perceive temporary defeat are the ultimate prerequisites for recognizing and seizing world-class opportunities. So let's jump right into this because we have to start with a story that frankly sounds like it belongs in a movie.
It really does, but
Yeah.
it perfectly illustrates the claim that thoughts are actual functional things. It establishes this core premise that an intangible thought, when it's mixed with a definiteness of purpose, absolute persistence, and a burning desire, actually translates into physical reality.
Yeah.
And the clearest example of this is the story of Edwin C. Barnes.
Right. So, to set the stage for you listening, imagine the Gilded Age. Thomas Edison is the undisputed king of innovation. He is the Elon Musk or Steve Jobs of his day, completely untouchable to the average person.
Total titan of industry.
Exactly. And here comes Edwin C. Barnes. Now, Barnes is a guy who literally traveled by freight train. They called it blind baggage to get to Orange, New Jersey. He arrives at Edison's legendary laboratory looking like an absolute tramp. Ragged clothes, unkempt, completely devoid of any outward indicators of success or status.
Nothing going for him on paper.
Right. But inside his head, he possessed the thoughts of a king. Because his definite desire, his singular, all-consuming obsession, was to work with Edison, not for him.
And we really have to pause on that distinction because it's huge. He didn't want a job. He didn't want a paycheck just to survive. He wanted a full-fledged partnership with the most famous, powerful inventor on the planet.
Okay, but I have to stop you there because this is where these kinds of historical anecdotes usually lose me. You're telling me a guy shows up looking homeless, walks into the most famous laboratory in the world, demands to be the founder's partner, and Edison just magically says, sure, let's do business.
Well, no,
And if someone walked into a major tech CEO's office today looking like they just rolled off a freight train and demanded a partnership, they'd be escorted out by security in about 4 seconds. It just doesn't work like that in the real world.
you're entirely right to be skeptical. And that is exactly the myth of overnight success that we have to dismantle right now. Edison didn't make him a partner instantly. The reality is much more nuanced, and it's really grounded in human psychology.
Okay, so what actually happened?
So Edison himself later reflected on this exact meeting. He noted that while Barnes looked like an ordinary tramp, there was something in the expression of his face, his physical demeanor, that conveyed an absolute, unwavering determination.
So Edison just read his vibe. Sort of, but it's deeper than that. Edison had learned from years of managing thousands of people that when someone desires a thing so deeply that they are willing to stake their entire future on a single turn of the wheel, they are going to win. But to your point, Edison didn't hand him a partnership. He gave him a chance at the absolute bottom.
Right, he gave him a job sweeping floors. But again, let's push on this. Sweeping a floor doesn't make you a partner. Edison had hundreds of people doing menial labor. Lots of people sweep floors and just stay janitors for the rest of their lives. What was Barnes actually doing differently while he was holding that broom?
That is the pivotal question. On the outside, to anyone else in that laboratory, Barnes was just another guy doing trivial tasks at a nominal wage. But we have to look at the cognitive framing.
Okay, explain that.
Well, most people in that position would be thinking, I'm a janitor. I'll try this for a few months. Maybe Edison will notice my sweeping skills. And if he doesn't, I'll go get a sales job somewhere else.
They'd have a backup plan. Yeah, exactly, a fallback. Barnes didn't have a fallback plan. He burned his bridges. Biologically and psychologically, when you leave yourself no possible way of retreat, your brain operates differently. Your amygdala, your survival instincts, they all wire together to force creative problem solving because it is literally win or perish.
So he's sweeping the floor, but in his mind, he's already the partner.
Precisely. And this went on 5 years past.
Wait, 5 years?
5 years of menial labor. And let's be clear about what 5 years actually feels like. That is 1,825 days of waking up, putting on work clothes, and doing unglamorous, repetitive tasks with absolutely no promise of attainment.
That sounds agonizing.
Right. No promotion, no hint that a partnership was coming. The psychological endurance required for that is staggering. But in his mind, every minute of those 5 years, he was constantly intensifying his desire. He was maintaining a state of extreme readiness.
Which is fascinating because it means he wasn't just waiting around for luck, he was keeping his brain primed. And eventually the opportunity does arrive, but it completely subverts expectations because it doesn't look like a golden ticket.
Not at all.
It comes disguised as a massive setback for the company. Edison had just invented this new office device, which was originally called the Edison dictating machine and later became known as the Ediphone.
And the existing sales staff absolutely hated it.
They despised it. They looked at this odd piece of machinery and basically told Edison it couldn't be sold. They said it would require too much effort to educate the public, no one would want it, it was a dud. But Barnes sees this exact same machine, hears the exact same complaints from the experts, and sees his opening.
Yeah, where the seasoned sales professionals saw a complete failure, Barnes saw his partnership.
And we have to ask why. Why did Barnes see what the experts missed? This isn't just historical serendipity, right? There is an actual neurological mechanism at play here.
There absolutely is. Have you ever bought a specific car, say like a red Honda, and suddenly you see red Hondas everywhere on the road?
Oh yeah, all the time. It's like they just spawned into existence the moment I drove off the lot.
Right. That's your reticular activating system, or RAS, at work. Your brain is constantly bombarded with millions of bits of sensory information every single second. If you processed all of it, you would go insane.
Just total sensory overload.
Exactly. So your RAS acts as a filter. It only lets through information that it deems important to your survival or your current dominant focus. The sales team's dominant focus was maintaining their comfortable status quo. So their RAS filtered the Ediphone as a threat, a nuisance.
Oh, okay.
But Barnes's dominant focus for 5 years had been finding any possible avenue to become Edison's partner. His RAS was tuned to a hyperspecific frequency. So when this strange, unwanted machine appeared, his brain immediately flagged it not as a problem, but as the exact vehicle he had been waiting for.
That makes so much sense. It's
Yeah.
like the algorithm on your social media feed. If you linger on thoughts of failure, or if you constantly engage with content about how hard everything is, the algorithm of your subconscious feeds you more reasons to be afraid and more obstacles.
Right. It gives you what you focus on.
Yeah, it filters out the good stuff, but if you program that internal algorithm with a definite purpose, it suddenly highlights the hidden opportunities around you that everyone else is scrolling right past.
That is a perfect analogy. The algorithm of Barnes's mind was optimized for partnership. So he approached Edison, pitched his idea to sell the machine, and Edison, seeing that hunger, gave him the contract. And Barnes didn't just sell a few units. He sold them so massively all over the nation that it spawned a famous slogan, which was made by Edison and installed by Barnes.
Wow, he literally willed his name next to Edison's into existence.
He did. That business alliance lasted over 3 decades and made Barnes incredibly wealthy. But the real asset he acquired wasn't the money. It was the empirical proof that a specific, cultivated state of mind, an intangible impulse of thought, could be transmuted into physical reality.
Okay, so for you listening, the practical takeaway here is massive, especially if you are building something right now. Opportunity has a sly, highly ironic habit of slipping in through the back door. It frequently comes disguised as misfortune, a market downturn, or a temporary defeat.
So true.
If you are only looking for easy, obvious wins, you will completely miss your version of the Ediphone. You have to maintain your definite purpose so that when your competitors are complaining about a broken supply chain or a terrible market environment, your internal algorithm highlights the gap, and you can step in and say, I can solve this.
Exactly. You have to be ready, and that readiness is entirely cognitive. But this brings us to a critical contrast, because not everyone maintains that state of mind when the physical evidence seems to be screaming at them to stop. If Barnes shows us the power of persisting until the opportunity reveals itself, the next story we need to explore shows us the devastating cost of stopping too soon.
Oh, man. This is the story of R.U. Darby and the gold mine. This one honestly hurts to think about. It's the ultimate cautionary tale for anyone who has ever poured their heart into a project and then just hit a wall.
It really is gut-wrenching. It centers on a man named R.U. Darby, or more specifically, his uncle. The uncle caught gold fever during the gold rush days and went west to Colorado to dig and grow rich. This wasn't just a whim. He staked a claim, grabbed a pick and shovel, and put in the grueling physical labor.
And he actually succeeded initially, right? He found a shining ore.
He did. But the reality of mining is that finding the ore with a shovel was only step one. He couldn't get it out of the ground at scale without heavy machinery.
Right. So what does he do? He quietly covers up the mine, goes all the way back east to Maryland, and tells his relatives and a few neighbors about the strike. He basically sells them on the vision. They pool their life savings, they buy the expensive mining machinery, and they ship it out to Colorado. And Darby goes back with his uncle to work the mine.
And at first, their physical evidence completely validates their effort. They mine the first car of ore, they ship it to a smelter, and the returns prove they are sitting on one of the richest mines in Colorado.
Just massive validation.
Totally. The math is clear. A few more cars of ore, and they will clear all their debts and be fabulously wealthy.
Down go the drills, up go their hopes. They are literally on the precipice of generational wealth. But then, the unthinkable happens. The vein of gold ore simply disappears. They reach the end of the rainbow, and the pot of gold is literally gone.
Gone.
But what happens psychologically in that moment? Because they don't just stop immediately, right? They're desperate. They have their neighbor's life savings on the line.
Right, they experience the ultimate cognitive dissonance. The physical world is telling them it's over, but their desire is still burning, so they keep drilling. They drill on desperately, trying to pick up the vein again. But days turn into weeks, and they find absolutely nothing. They hit a wall of solid, worthless rock.
Just grinding away for nothing.
Yeah, and eventually, the despair overtakes their desire. They make a fatal, irreversible decision. They decide to quit.
They sell all of this heavy, expensive machinery to a local junk man for a few $100s, literally pennies on the dollar, and they take the train back home in total defeat. But here is where the story shifts from a sad historical anecdote to a really profound business lesson. Because the junk man wasn't just some guy buying scrap metal to melt down.
No, the junk man understood a principle that Darby and his uncle completely missed. The junk man didn't just haul the machinery away and assume the miners were right. He called in a mining engineer to look at the mine and do some calculations.
I really want to highlight that. He sought expert counsel. He didn't just trust the failure of the guys before him.
Precisely. And this engineer looked at the geology and pointed out a concept that Darby and his uncle were completely ignorant of, which is the concept of fault lines. The earth shifts over millennia. Veins of gold break and move. They don't just vanish into thin air, they get displaced.
And when the engineer did the math on the fault line, what did he calculate?
He calculated that the vein of gold would be found exactly 3 feet from where the Darbys had stopped drilling.
3 feet. I mean, after traveling across the country, raising all the money, digging the hole, they stopped 36 inches away from generational wealth.
And that is exactly where the junk man found it. He pulled millions of dollars in ore from that mine.
Millions.
Millions. Why? Because he knew enough to seek specialized knowledge and look past the immediate physical failure before giving up.
This translates so perfectly to modern entrepreneurship. It's like a modern startup founder. Imagine you're building a software platform. You've convinced your friends and family to invest. You've built the MVP. You get some initial traction. That's your first car of ore, right?
Right.
But then user acquisition totally stalls. You burn through your venture capital. You run out of runway. The stress becomes just unbearable. And you just abandon the code. You shut down the servers and walk away. And then a competitor comes along, buys your domain and your IP for pennies, looks at the architecture, and realizes you were just targeting the wrong demographic. They fix literally one line of code, they find the digital fault line, and suddenly the platform scales globally, and they make $1 billion.
It happens every single day in Silicon Valley. The mechanics change, the technology changes, but the human behavior remains exactly the same. And this forces us to examine the true nature of failure.
Yeah.
Failure is not an endpoint, it is a trickster. It has a keen sense of irony and cunning. It delights in tripping people up when success is almost within reach. In psychology, there's a concept called an extinction burst.
Right.
Right before a behavior is completely extinguished or right before a massive breakthrough occurs, the resistance is often the highest.
Wow, an extinction burst.
Yeah, the most common cause of failure across all disciplines, sales, engineering, art, business, is quitting at the very first sign of temporary defeat, usually right when the extinction burst is happening.
But the story of Darby doesn't end in tragedy, which I think is vital for anyone listening who might feel like they recently quit 3 feet from their own gold. Darby didn't let this destroy him forever. He paid back every single dollar he borrowed from his relatives, which took him years of grueling labor. But how did he take that massive psychological trauma and actually use it?
Well, he weaponized the trauma. Darby eventually transitioned into the life insurance business. Now, selling life insurance, especially back then, was notoriously difficult. It was an industry built entirely on facing rejection. But Darby became an absolute titan in the field. He became one of fewer than 50 individuals in the entire country who sold more than $1 million of life insurance annually.
And how did he do that? Because he wasn't a natural salesman.
No. He did it by completely reframing his relationship with the word no. Every time a prospect told him no, every time they tried to show him the door or shut him down, his brain immediately flashed back to that dirt wall in Colorado. He remembered the literal pain of stopping 3 feet from gold.
He used that pain as fuel.
Exactly. He made a vow to himself that he would never, ever stop just because someone said no or because the immediate environment looked bleak. He treated every no not as a rejection, but as evidence that he was just 3 feet away from the yes.
So for you listening, how do you apply this today? You have to completely redefine what a roadblock means in your career or your project. A no from an investor, a failed product launch, a rejection letter. These are not stop signs. They are yield signs. They are data points. They are indicators that the gold might just be on the other side of a fault line you haven't identified yet. If you quit, you are simply leaving the millions for the metaphorical junk man who is willing to dig those last 3 feet.
Exactly. You have to divorce your emotional state from the temporary physical evidence. But what's truly fascinating about Darby's persistence is that it wasn't solely born from the regret of the gold mine. He had another experience, a much earlier, deeply visceral experience that taught him the absolute power of definiteness of purpose.
Yes, the 50-cent lesson. This is arguably the most intense story we're going to cover today. It reads like a tense psychological thriller.
It really does.
So let's paint the picture. Darby is back east, helping his uncle grind wheat in an old-fashioned mill. This is the same uncle who gave up on the gold mine. And it's noted that he was a man with a fierce, volatile temper. So they are in this musty, noisy old mill working away when the door quietly opens.
And in walks a small child. She is the daughter of a sharecropper who lived on the uncle's farm. Now, we have to understand the social dynamics of this era. A sharecropper's child had absolutely zero structural power, zero social standing, and zero physical strength. The expectation in that environment was total, unquestioning submission to the landowner. So she steps inside the mill and just stands silently near the door.
The uncle looks up, sees her standing there, and barks at her roughly, "What do you want?" And the child meekly says, "My mama say to send her 50 cents.
The uncle's reaction is immediate and aggressive. He retorts, "I'll not do it. Now you run on home." And the little girl says, "Yes, sir." But she doesn't move. She stays completely rooted to the spot.
So the uncle goes back to his work, assuming he's dismissed her. A few minutes pass. He looks up again, sees her still standing there, and he completely loses his temper. He yells, "I told you to go on home. Now go, or I'll take a switch to you."
And again, the child softly says, "Yes, sir." But she remains frozen. She doesn't budge a single inch.
The uncle is absolutely furious. He drops the sack of grain he's pouring. He picks up a thick piece of wood, a barrel stave, and he marches toward this little girl with an expression that promises a severe physical beating. Darby is standing there watching this unfold, holding his breath, terrified of the violence that's about to happen.
And this is where the dynamic completely inverts. As this enraged, grown man approaches with a weapon, the child doesn't cower. She doesn't run away in terror, which is what every biological instinct would tell her to do. She does the unthinkable.
She takes one quick step forward, directly into his path, looks straight up into his fierce eyes, and screams at the absolute top of her lungs, "My mom has got to have that 50 cents.
And the uncle, he freezes. He stops dead in his tracks. He stares at her for a long moment and slowly lowers the piece of wood, puts it on the floor, reaches into his pocket, and hands her a $50.
Wow. The little girl takes the money and slowly backs out the door, never taking her eyes off the conquered adult.
Okay, we have to unpack this, because this isn't just a story about a stubborn kid. Let's be critical here. If a kid just screams in a grocery store today, they don't conquer the adult, right? They just get dragged out of the store. What is the actual psychological difference between this child's demand and just being an annoying, petulant kid throwing a tantrum? Why did this grown, angry, powerful man completely yield to a powerless child?
It is a profound study in psychological dominance. When the child screamed, she wasn't throwing a tantrum hoping to get her way. She had entered a state of mind that we discussed earlier with Barnes, absolute unwavering definiteness of purpose.
Right.
Her mind was entirely closed to the possibility of failure. She wasn't asking for the money anymore. She was demanding that reality conform to her purpose.
She bypassed his conscious anger entirely. She generated a reality distortion field. You hear that term applied to Steve Jobs a lot. His ability to convince people that the impossible was possible through sheer force of will. This child did exactly that. When someone operates with zero doubt, with absolute conviction that leaves no room for alternative outcomes, it exerts a magnetic, almost paralyzing force on the people around them.
It's like a physical energy.
Exactly. The uncle's anger was a conscious emotion. The child's conviction was a primal subconscious force. And in a clash between conscious emotion and subconscious absolute conviction, conviction wins almost every time.
Darby witnessed this and was completely stunned. He saw a powerless child deliberately master an adult through nothing but mental state. And years later, when he was in the life insurance business, he actively used this exact memory. When a wealthy, powerful prospect tried to bow him out of an office without buying, he didn't just rely on sales tactics or spreadsheets.
No, he tapped into that energy.
Yeah, he visualized that defiant child in the old mill. He saw her big eyes glaring in defiance, and he tapped into that exact same frequency. He said to himself, I've got to make this sale, and he refused to accept the no.
Which brings us to the application for the listener. How do you harness this?
Exactly. Because we all face our own versions of that enraged uncle. Maybe it's an intimidating gatekeeper, a skeptical venture capitalist, a terrible boss, or even just our own imposter syndrome threatening to beat us down. How do we use the 50-cent lesson?
Well, you have to strip away the fear of the weapon being wielded against you. Whatever that threat represents in your life, loss of status, financial risk, embarrassment, you have to look past it and close your mind entirely to failure. When you approach a negotiation, a pitch, or a major life decision, you cannot go in hoping for a positive outcome. You must go in with the mental posture of, my mom has got to have that 50 cents.
I love that.
It is the transition from a passive wish to an active, unyielding command.
You transition from asking the world for permission to demanding the outcome. And that connects perfectly to the next story, because we move from a sharecropper's child commanding 50 cents to an industrial titan commanding a literal engineering miracle. The scale of the request changes astronomically, but the underlying mental principle remains exactly the same.
We are talking about Henry Ford and the development of the V8 engine.
Right. Now, Henry Ford is already a massive success at this point. He has completely revolutionized transportation. But he has a new vision. He wants to produce his now famous V8 automobile engine. And his vision is incredibly specific. He wants all 8 cylinders cast in one single solid block of metal.
He brings this idea to his team of brilliant engineers. Now, these are the top minds in metallurgy, physics, and manufacturing. He instructs them to produce a design, they put it on paper, they run the math, and the engineers, unanimously to a man, agree that it is simply impossible.
Unanimous agreement.
Unanimous. You cannot cast an 8-cylinder gas engine block in one piece. The technology of the time, the heat distribution, the molding processes, all the science said absolutely no.
And this is where I want to push back again. We are taught to trust experts. If the smartest engineers in the world tell you that the laws of physics prevent something from happening, the logical, rational thing to do is listen to them. How is Ford not just being an arrogant, delusional boss here?
That is the trap of expertise. Experts are incredibly valuable, but their knowledge is bound by the parameters of what has already been done. They know too many ways something can fail, which often paralyzes innovation. Ford understood that impossible is usually just a temporary constraint waiting for a new paradigm. So his response is legendary. He doesn't argue the physics with them. He just says, produce it anyway.
And the engineers reiterate that it's impossible, and Ford says, go ahead and stay on the job until you succeed, no matter how much time is required.
So they go to work. Because he's Henry Ford, and he signs the checks. 6 months pass. Nothing happens. They try every conceivable plan, every molding technique. Another 6 months pass. A full year of continuous expensive failure. They come back to Ford and report that they have found absolutely no way to carry out his orders. They assure him, again, it is out of the question.
And Ford doesn't blink. He absorbs a year of failure and expert consensus, and he says, go right ahead. I want it and I'll have it. And shortly after that, as if by absolute magic, the secret was discovered. The engineers figured out the casting process. Ford's determination broke reality to his will.
What's truly fascinating here is what this reveals about the cognitive biases of experts. We have a profound habit of measuring everything by our own current impressions and beliefs. The source material shares a brilliant, subtle anecdote to illustrate this. It's about a prominent Asian student who attended the University of Chicago.
Oh, right. The university president meets with the student and asks him what impressed him as the most noticeable characteristic of the American people. And the student replied, why, your eyes. Your eyes are off aslant.
Exactly. It's a profound observation about perspective. Caucasians often think people of Asian descent have different eyes. But to the Asian student, whose baseline of reality was entirely different, the Caucasian eyes were the oddity.
That makes perfect sense.
The point is that we measure the world strictly by our own familiar limitations. We foolishly believe that what is unfamiliar to us is somehow wrong, or, in the case of Ford's engineers, impossible.
We let our own limited experience, or the limited experience of our industry, dictate the boundaries of reality. Ford succeeded precisely because he completely refused to accept the limitations set by the so-called experts. He wasn't constrained by their baseline.
He demanded the outcome and ignored the consensus of impossibility. He forced them into a reality distortion field until their engineering caught up with his definiteness of purpose.
You know, early in the source material, there is an incredibly practical piece of advice that I love. It suggests that you go buy a fine dictionary, turn to the word impossible, and literally clip it out of the book with a pair of scissors. Physically remove the concept from your lexicon.
It's a powerful symbolic act. It's cognitive behavioral therapy before the term existed.
It is. And it is so liberating when you finally realize that impossible is almost always just an opinion. It's not a law of physics. When someone says your business idea is impossible or scaling your product is impossible, it just means they lack the imagination or the definiteness of purpose to see the solution.
The takeaway for the listener is that you must actively manage your cognitive state. You have to move from failure consciousness, which is spending all your mental energy knowing the rules that won't work and all the things that cannot be done, and you have to shift to success consciousness. You're challenged to stop focusing on the limitations and instead demand the outcome you desire, forcing your internal algorithm to find the path.
Okay, so let's look at what we've covered. We have Edwin Barnes willing himself into a partnership with Edison by maintaining extreme readiness. We have the child commanding 50 cents from an enraged adult through absolute definiteness of purpose. We have Henry Ford commanding a physical engineering miracle from resistant experts by ignoring the word impossible.
Right.
These are vastly different scenarios. So what does this all mean? Why do these stories actually work? It cannot just be survivorship bias or historical coincidence.
It's not a coincidence at all. The source posits that there is an underlying universal mechanism at play regarding how the human brain interacts with reality itself. This is where we move from motivational stories into the actual mechanics of thought.
The source explores the meaning behind those famous lines by the poet William Ernest Henley from the poem Invictus. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. We've all heard that quote. It's recited in movies. It's on a million motivational posters.
Yes, but the text argues that while Henley stated a profound poetic truth, he failed to explain the philosophical and psychological meaning behind it. He told us that we are the captains, but he didn't explain how the ship is actually steered.
So how does it work? Why are we the masters of our fate?
Because we have the power to control our thoughts. The universe in which we live and the social structures we navigate adapt to the nature of the thoughts we hold in our minds. In a very real neurological sense, our brains become magnetized with our dominating thoughts.
Let's ground that because magnetized brains can sound a bit esoteric. Let's go back to the algorithm analogy we used earlier.
Perfect. Think of your subconscious mind as the most powerful machine learning algorithm in existence. Whatever you feed it, whatever thoughts dominate your conscious mind, the algorithm optimizes for. If you constantly dwell on thoughts of poverty, fear, or how unfair your industry is, your brain's algorithm optimizes for those variables.
It just serves you more of the same.
Exactly. It filters your perception of reality to show you more threats, more unfairness, and more reasons to fail. You literally become blind to opportunity because your brain has deemed it irrelevant to your dominant thought pattern.
But if you feed the algorithm a definite major purpose, like Barnes did,
Then the algorithm flips. It begins to optimize for success. It scans every conversation, every news article, every setback, looking for the hidden variable that can advance your purpose. It attracts to you the forces, the people, the circumstances of life which harmonize with that dominating thought, not by magic, but by hyper-focused perception and action.
but there is a massive catch here, isn't there? The algorithm doesn't have a moral compass.
That is the most critical point of all. The universe and your subconscious mind do not discriminate. This mechanism makes absolutely no attempt to differentiate between destructive thoughts and constructive thoughts. It will urge you to translate thoughts of poverty and failure into physical reality just as quickly and efficiently as it will translate thoughts of riches and success. It just follows the code you give it.
The text ties this explicitly to the Great Depression, which I found fascinating. It describes the Depression not just as a failure of banks or economic policy, but as a mass psychological event. It was a mass viral infection of the mind. The minds of the people became magnetized with fear and poverty. Everyone was talking about lack, expecting lack, acting out of fear.
And so they physically manifested a prolonged reality of fear and poverty. The economy only began to recover when the psychological state of the nation shifted, when faith and forward-looking optimism gradually replaced that paralyzing fear.
The mechanism works perfectly in both directions, on an individual scale and a societal scale. If your mind is dominated by what you lack, you will attract more lack because your behaviors will become defensive and contracted. If it's dominated by an intense desire for a specific goal, your behaviors become expansive, risk-tolerant, and perceptive.
And this isn't just theory written in a book. The text gives a beautiful, concrete example of a man named Jennings Randolph.
Yes. The author of the source material actually delivered a commencement address at Salem College detailing this exact principle of thought, desire, and the algorithm of the mind, specifically using the story of Henry Ford as an example.
And Jennings Randolph was sitting in that graduating class. He was a young man listening to this concept. He internalized it, he applied it to his own ambitions, and he went on to become a distinguished United States Senator, serving for decades. He even wrote a letter to the author, which is included in the text, stating explicitly that planting that idea in his mind that day was responsible for his entire career in public service.
So it works in politics, it works in business, it works in daily life.
The practical takeaway is undeniable. If you want to accumulate riches, launch a successful company, or achieve any form of high-level success, you must deliberately, consciously magnetize your mind with an intense desire for it. You cannot just casually wish for things. Wishing is passive. Wishing will not bring riches. You must become success conscious or money conscious until that desire literally drives you to create definite, actionable plans for acquiring it. You have to completely saturate your internal algorithm.
So let's synthesize all of this. We've covered a tremendous amount of ground, from freight trains to gold mines to modern psychology. But there is a very clear, undeniable thread running through all these stories.
There really is. If we look at Edwin C. Barnes maintaining his focus for 5 years while sweeping floors, the defiant child dominating an angry adult in the mill, and Henry Ford demanding the V8 engine from resistant experts, they didn't share the same education. They didn't share the same background, social standing, or access to capital. But they shared one overarching unifying trait, which was a state of mind that was completely immune to the word impossible.
And on the flip side, R.U. Darby and his uncle showed us the exact measurable cost of lacking that state of mind. They showed us the tragedy of quitting 3 feet from gold because they let the immediate physical evidence overwrite their internal desire.
The memorable insight here, the true soul of this chapter and this entire philosophy, is that the physical world is ultimately just a mirror. It is a mirror reflecting the dominating thoughts of the human mind. Whether you quit 3 feet from gold when things get hard, or you stand your ground for a 50-cent piece against a towering threat, your physical reality will eventually, inevitably, bend to your absolute mental resolve.
It bends to the algorithm you've programmed in your brain.
Exactly. And this raises an incredibly important question, a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. If your brain is constantly acting as a magnet or an algorithm, optimizing for your dominating thoughts, consider what you've been passively magnetizing into your life over the last 24 hours. Just do an audit of the thoughts that have dominated your mind since you woke up yesterday. If your internal thoughts were physically broadcast on a screen for everyone to see, what would they look like? Would they look like a blueprint for a V8 engine? A plan of unwavering definiteness and ambition? Or would they look like a step-by-step manual on how to give up 3 feet from gold?
That is a deeply confronting question. Are you broadcasting fear, anxiety, and reasons why things won't work? Or are you broadcasting defiance, readiness, and absolute purpose? Because whatever it is, the universe, your circumstances, and your own subconscious are organizing themselves right now to give you more of it. Now that you understand that every great fortune, every incredible startup, every monumental achievement begins with a single intangible impulse of thought, how exactly do you take a fleeting casual wish and forge it into a burning desire so hot that it melts away every obstacle in its path? That is exactly what we will uncover in our next deep dive. So what if the difference between, a fleeting daydream and an actual empire-building fortune? What if it isn't raw talent, or like timing, or even luck? What if it really just boils down to a specific, almost terrifying state of mind?
Yeah, that's a question that forces us to completely reevaluate, well, the whole architecture of success, honestly,
Right.
because we're so deeply conditioned, I mean, pretty much from birth, to look for those tactical advantages. We look at the Ivy League degree or the seed
Just
capital.
wrap location, right, the influential network, all that external stuff.
Exactly, all external. But when you examine the lives of people who have achieved the seemingly impossible, and you strip all of those external factors away, you're consistently left with something entirely internal, like a psychological baseline that most people never tap into.
And that baseline is the entire focus of what we're looking at today. We're doing a deep dive into the foundational concepts from the desire chapter of our source material.
hmm Which argues that this specific state of mind is the literal starting point of all achievement. It's not just a nice to have. Right. And by the end of this conversation, you're going to understand why simply wishing for success is actually a trap. And, how the process of turning a very specific goal into a bridge-burning obsession is the absolute non-negotiable first step for anyone trying to build something massive.
Yeah, and to even begin that conversation, I think we have to establish a really strict boundary around the words we're using.
Okay, what do you mean?
Well, in everyday language, if I ask you what you want, you might say, you wish for a promotion, or you hope for a better year, or you desire a new car. We throw those words into the exact same bucket.
Yeah, they're just synonyms in casual conversation.
Right. But the text draws a massive impenetrable wall between a wish and a burning desire. I mean, they are on completely opposite ends of the human psychological spectrum.
Let's draw that line clearly for the listener then. Because a wish, practically speaking, is a passive state, right?
Yeah.
It's like the guy sitting on his couch on a Tuesday night saying, man, I wish I was a millionaire.
Exactly. Or someone scrolling the social media thinking, oh, I wish I had that kind of creative freedom.
Yeah, it requires absolutely zero caloric output. It demands nothing of you.
And worse, it leaves you entirely vulnerable to the winds of circumstance. If you merely wish for something, your internal monologue is essentially saying, hey, if this happens to fall into my lap, I'll gladly accept it. But if it doesn't, well, I'll just stay exactly where I am.
It's a state of perpetual contingency, like, I'll be successful if the universe hands it to me.
Right. Which brings us to the alternative, the burning desire.
Okay, define that for me, because it sounds intense.
It is intense. According to the source material, a burning desire is an active, all-consuming obsession. It's not something you have. It's something that has you.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a psychological state that systematically eliminates any possibility of retreat. It requires a target that is highly definite, meaning it's specific down to the smallest detail, and it's backed by a relentless, non-negotiable win or perish mentality.
Win or perish, that's a heavy phrase.
It changes everything. When you operate from this state, your goal ceases to be a preference. It becomes the organizing principle of your entire central nervous system.
Everything you see and hear gets filtered through it.
Exactly. Filtered right through the lens of that singular obsession.
I want to ground this in reality, though, because when you describe it like that, it sounds almost, I don't know, mythological. But the text provides this incredible historical anchor with the story of Edwin C. Barnes.
Oh, the Barnes story is phenomenal.
I've read this story multiple times, and the sheer audacity of this guy is just staggering. So Barnes is living during the boom of the electrical industry. But he doesn't just want to work in the industry. He doesn't even just want a job at a good company.
Right. He has a highly specific, definite desire.
Exactly. He wants to go into business with Thomas Edison, not as an employee, as a full-fledged business partner.
And we really have to pause and look at the objective reality of Barnes' situation when this idea took hold in his mind. Because if you looked at his life on paper, this goal was mathematically impossible.
Yeah, he had no money. Like none.
No money, very little formal education, zero technical expertise in electricity or invention,
Right.
and he didn't know Thomas Edison. He didn't know anyone who knew Thomas Edison. He was separated from his goal by every conceivable metric of class, geography, and education.
But the desire was so overwhelming that it just bypassed logic. It forced physical action. I mean, he didn't even have the train fare to get from where he was to East Orange, New Jersey, where Edison's labs were.
So what does he do?
He travels by what they called blind baggage on a freight train. And for those who don't know the history of early rail transport, riding blind baggage meant hiding in the space between the baggage car and the locomotive tender.
Which is incredibly dangerous.
Extremely. You are exposed to the elements, the soot, the coal dust, extreme noise, the weather. It is a miserable, degrading way to travel.
Yet he endures it because the desire is stronger than the physical discomfort.
Yeah, he steps off that freight train in New Jersey, literally covered in dirt and soot.
Yeah.
He looks exactly like what society would classify as an ordinary tramp.
Right.
And he walks straight up to the doors of the most famous laboratory in the world, presents himself to Thomas Edison, and simply announces that he is there to go into business with him.
The interaction between those two men in that moment is like one of the most fascinating case studies in human perception, because Edison was notoriously tough.
Oh yeah, he was a demanding, brilliant judge of character. He dealt with ambitious people every single day.
Right, and by Edison's own later account, Barnes's physical appearance was entirely against him. He looked like a vagabond. But Edison noted something extraordinary in the man's face.
The physical rags didn't match the psychological posture.
Exactly. Edison said that Barnes looked like a man who was absolutely determined to get what he had come after.
That is the physical manifestation of the burning desire right there.
Precisely, because Edison had learned through decades of hard-won experience that when a person desires a thing so deeply that they are willing to stake their entire future on a single turn of the wheel, they are almost guaranteed to win.
Yeah, you can't fake that.
You really can't. The posture, the eye contact, the tone of voice, these subtle biological cues communicate absolute conviction. People subconsciously pick up on whether you are merely exploring an option or if you have entirely committed your soul to a path.
Edison saw that Barnes's thoughts were those of a king, even if his clothes were those of a beggar.
But here's where the story defies the typical Hollywood narrative. Because in a movie, Edison would be so impressed that he'd immediately shake his hand him a suit, and make him a partner on the spot.
Cue the montage.
Right. But that didn't happen. Edison gave him a job, but it was menial labor at a nominal wage. Sweeping floors, doing grunt work around the office.
And he didn't do this for like a week or a month to prove himself. Barnes swept floors in that building for 5 years. 5 whole years.
Which is the crux of the entire concept. Because the true test of a burning desire is not the initial spark. It's the capacity for sustained, unrewarded endurance.
I really struggle to wrap my head around that timeline. I mean, if a friend of mine told me they were destined to be the business partner of, say, Elon Musk or Tim Cook,
Right.
and their master plan was to accept a job sweeping the floors of their corporate headquarters for 5 years without a single promotion or hint of a partnership, I would think they were delusional.
Most people would.
How does a human brain sustain that level of focus while scrubbing dirt? How does that not just become crushing depression?
Well, it would become depression for a person operating on a wish. If Barnes merely wished to be a partner, the cognitive dissonance between his grand dream and his daily reality of pushing a broom would have shattered his ego within months.
You would have quit, complaining that Edison didn't recognize his genius.
Exactly. But because it was a definite burning desire, Barnes framed the menial labor entirely differently. In his own mind, he wasn't a janitor trying to become a partner. He was Edison's partner, currently occupying the role of a janitor to learn the business from the ground up.
Oh, that's a huge shift. He lived in the psychological reality of the partnership before the physical reality caught up.
He did. He used those 5 years not just to maintain his desire, but to intensify it. He observed how the business worked. He learned the personalities. He was physically in the environment he wanted to conquer.
Just waiting for the opening.
And the source text points out a very specific pattern about how these stories unfold. Opportunity rarely introduces itself formally. It often sneaks in through the back door, disguised as misfortune or a temporary defeat. You have to be deeply primed to even recognize it.
Which brings us to the Ediphone.
Yeah.
So Edison invents this new dictating machine for office use. He reveals it to his elite sales staff. the guys in the expensive suits who are making all the big money.
Right.
They look at this new invention and they completely reject it. They tell Edison it's a dud. It's too clunky. It's going to be too hard to sell. The market doesn't want it. They completely lack the vision and the enthusiasm to move the product.
The highly paid experts looked at the machine and saw an insurmountable obstacle.
But Barnes, the guy pushing the broom, looks at the exact same piece of equipment. And because his brain has been saturated with this singular obsession for 5 years, he doesn't see a clunky machine.
He sees his opening.
Exactly. He sees the missing piece of the puzzle. He goes to Edison and says, I can sell this. And because the rest of the sales force had abandoned it, Edison gives the floor sweeper a shot.
And Barnes doesn't just sell a few units. He creates an entirely new market paradigm. He sells it so successfully with such ferocity that he secures a national distribution contract.
Which leads to the creation of an entirely new business entity, and one of the most famous slogans of that era, made by Edison and installed by Barnes.
He manifested the exact partnership he had envisioned half a decade earlier.
It's wild.
Yeah.
Now, the text mentions a historical metaphor to explain this level of commitment, and I really want to dive into it. It talks about the ancient warrior who sailed his army across the sea to an enemy shore.
Yes, burning of the ships.
Right. He unloads his troops and their equipment, and then he gives the command to literally burn their own ships. He stands before his men and says, you see the boats going up in smoke. That means we cannot leave these shores alive unless we win. We now have no choice. We win or we perish.
It is the ultimate psychological forcing function.
And this is where the text completely flies in the face of modern conventional wisdom. Because if you talk to career counselors, financial advisors, or just society at large today, the prevailing mantra is always keep your options open.
Oh, always. Have a plan B.
Right. Diversify your risk. You never put all your eggs in one basket. But this chapter is arguing that having a plan B is often the exact mechanism that guarantees the failure of plan A.
Yeah, and the logic of the plan B is rooted in fear and loss aversion, which is completely understandable from an evolutionary perspective. I mean, we want a safety net.
Sure, nobody wants to end up on the street.
But we have to look at the psychological cost of that safety net. When you embark on any massive empire-building endeavor, you are guaranteed to encounter brutal friction.
Oh, absolutely. Rejection, financial terror, exhaustion.
In moments where continuing just seems totally illogical, if you have a plan B, if you have that safety net waiting for you, your brain will inevitably calculate the path of least resistance.
Yeah, when you're sleeping in a cold room in New Jersey after sweeping floors all day, the brain says, you know what, retail management isn't that bad. Let's just go do that.
Exactly. The moment the pain of pursuing Plan A exceeds a certain threshold, the existence of Plan B gives you a socially acceptable excuse to quit.
Wow.
But when you figuratively burn your ships, you eliminate the option of retreat. You hijack your brain's survival instincts and point them entirely toward your goal. If failure means metaphorical or literal destruction, your mind will suddenly start synthesizing solutions, finding energy, and generating resilience that you never knew you possessed.
If Barnes had kept his options open, if he told himself, I'll give this Edison thing 6 months, and if I'm not a manager by then, I'll go work at a bank.
He never would have survived the 5 years.
Never. He never would have survived the sweeping. The ships had to be burned. And it paid off. I mean, the text estimates that the partnership eventually made Barnes $2 or $3 million, which translates to tens of millions in today's money.
It does. But the author makes a point to emphasize that the financial windfall, as massive as it was secondary to the philosophical breakthrough. Barnes proved, in the laboratory of his own life, that an intangible, invisible impulse of thought can be transmuted into physical reality. He learned the actual mechanics of creation.
So if we translate this to you, the listener, right now, it really forces a very uncomfortable audit of your own ambitions. Like, think about the massive goal you've been telling yourself you want to achieve. Are you treating it like a wish or a desire?
Are you secretly keeping a fleet of ships anchored in the harbor just in case things get tough?
Yeah. Are you hedging your bets with a safe job, a fallback degree, or a comfortable excuse? Because the standard being set here is absolute. If you want to achieve the highest possible level, you have to be willing to strike the match and stake your entire future on your ability to execute.
But, we also have to acknowledge a practical reality here. It is relatively easy to talk about burning ships and maintaining a white-hot desire when things are generally stable.
Right. The theory sounds great when your health is fine, the economy is decent, and you're just trying to level up your career.
Exactly. The true stress test of this philosophy happens when the floor completely falls out from under you.
Which brings us to a crucial pivot in the material. Defiance in the face of disaster. What happens to that burning desire when you don't just hit a roadblock, but you lose absolutely everything?
And the historical evidence provided in the text suggests that for a certain type of mind, catastrophe isn't a signal to retreat. It's actually the catalyst required to meet what the author defines as the other self.
The other self. Okay, that sounds almost esoteric. Let's break down exactly what that means in a practical sense.
Yeah, it sounds a bit mystical, but the author posits that every human being has a dormant reservoir of imagination, resilience, and creative genius that they rarely, if ever, access during the normal course of life.
Because we're too comfortable.
Exactly. This other self is heavily guarded by our comfort zones and our daily routines. It only emerges under extreme duress.
I see.
When you are pushed completely to the brink, when every conventional option is stripped away, and you are staring into the abyss of total defeat, the shock to your system bypasses your normal limitations.
It forces you to adapt.
Right. You are introduced to a version of yourself that refuses to accept defeat, and this version operates with a level of clarity and power that your normal self just cannot comprehend.
To illustrate this, the text points to the aftermath of the Great Chicago Fire in 1871. And I really want to paint the picture of this because the context is vital. This wasn't just a bad day at the office. The fire burned for 3 days. It destroyed over 3 square miles of the city.
Thousands of buildings.
Reduced to ash. Hundreds of people died, and massive portions of the population were left homeless. The central business district was completely obliterated.
It was an apocalyptic scenario for the business owners of that era.
Exactly. So picture this group of merchants standing on State Street in the immediate aftermath. The smoke is still literally rising from the ruins of their storefronts. Their inventory is gone. Their infrastructure is gone.
Everything they built.
Gone. They hold an impromptu meeting right there in the ashes. And the consensus among almost all of them is entirely rational. They say, this is too much. The city is destroyed. We cannot recover from this. We need to cut our losses, leave Chicago, and try to rebuild our lives somewhere safer and easier.
And honestly, from a purely logistical and financial standpoint, abandoning the city was the logical move. The risk of rebuilding in a ruined city with no guarantee of economic recovery was astronomical.
But there was one merchant who rejected that logic entirely. Marshall Field. He is standing with this group, looking at the exact same devastation. But instead of packing his bags, he points a finger at the smoldering remains of his own store and makes a public vow. He says, gentlemen, on that very spot, I will build the world's greatest store, no matter how many times it may burn down.
Notice the specific language of that vow, too. He didn't just say, I'm going to try to rebuild my business, or I'm going to salvage what I can.
Right.
He elevated his desire in direct proportion to the disaster. He committed to building the world's greatest store, and he pre-accepted the possibility of future disasters, saying no matter how many times it may burn down. He used the catastrophe to meet his other self.
It really reminds me of how elite athletes respond to catastrophic season-ending injuries.
Oh, that's a great comparison. How so?
Well, a good athlete will tear their ACL, follow the rehab protocol, and focus entirely on just getting back to their baseline. They just want to be the player they were before the injury. But the truly historic generational athletes process the trauma completely differently. They end up confined to a couch for 6 months, unable to use their bodies. Instead of despairing, they use that time to obsessively study game film.
They analyze the psychology of their opponents.
Exactly. They rebuild their entire understanding of the sport. So when their body finally heals, they don't just return to their baseline. They return as a vastly superior, twice as strategic version of themselves. They use the disaster to force an evolution.
That is a brilliant modern parallel, and the text actually reinforces this concept with a deeply profound poem about the nature of our expectations.
Oh, I know the one.
It goes, I bargained with life for a penny, and life would pay no more. For life is a just employer. He gives you what you ask.
I love that.
The overarching theme here is that the universe, or life, or the economy, whatever you want to call it, is entirely neutral. It will ultimately yield exactly what you demand of it, no more and no less.
So if you demand a menial existence, it will provide one.
Exactly. If you allow a disaster to lower your asking price, life will gladly pay you less. But if you stand in the ashes of a disaster and demand greatness, you force life to meet your terms.
And the text provides this fascinating list of historical figures who essentially had to be broken by life before they could demand their true worth. It's almost as if their genius was trapped behind a wall of comfort, and it took a wrecking ball to set it free.
Yes, the examples of transmutation through suffering are profound. John Bunyan is a classic example.
Right.
He didn't write Pilgrim's Progress, which is one of the most famous pieces of literature in history, from a comfortable study. He wrote it after he was thrown into a damp prison cell for his religious beliefs. His
Wow.
physical liberty was taken, so he was forced to retreat into the boundless liberty of his own imagination.
And O. Henry, the legendary master of the short story.
Hmm.
He didn't discover his voice sitting in a Parisian cafe.
No, he didn't.
He discovered his immense talent while incarcerated in a prison in Columbus, Ohio, after being convicted of embezzlement. He literally met his other self while wearing a prison uniform.
Charles Dickens is another really powerful example here.
Oh, Dickens, yeah, his childhood was brutal.
Extremely. He spent a portion of his childhood doing grueling, repetitive labor pasting labels on blacking pots in a rat-infested factory while his father was in debtor's prison.
Just unimaginably bleak.
And later, it was the devastating tragedy of his first love that shattered his heart but penetrated his soul, giving him the emotional depth necessary to write masterpieces like David Copperfield.
In every single case, the disaster was the required entry fee to access their true capacity.
Exactly.
The source material even scales this concept up to a macroeconomic level, which I found fascinating. It makes a really provocative claim about the Great Depression. The author asserts that the Depression, despite its horrific toll on the average person, was actually a massive advantage for practical dreamers because it cleared away all the old entrenched systems.
Yeah, and if you look at economic history, the concept of creative destruction, coined by Joseph Schumpeter, perfectly aligns with this.
Creative destruction.
Right. When a massive disruption hits, whether it's the Great Depression in the 1930s, the 2008 financial crisis, or the current tectonic shifts we're seeing caused by artificial intelligence, the status quo is violently dismantled.
And for people operating on a wish, this is absolutely terrifying.
Terrifying. But for people armed with a definite purpose and a burning desire, chaos is a ladder. The destruction creates a massive vacuum. The old guard is paralyzed by fear, leaving wide open territory for anyone bold enough to advance.
So if you are listening to this right now and you are currently in the middle of a brutal season, maybe you just lost your job or your business went under, your industry got automated, or you suffered a profound personal failure, you are at a critical juncture.
You really are.
You can look at the ashes and lower your asking price from life. You can bargain for a penny, or you can do what Marshall Field did. You can recognize this exact moment of devastation as the formal introduction to your other self. You can use the weight of the disaster to forge a desire so intense that it makes your previous ambitions look like child's play.
But, and this is a big but, here is where we must introduce a heavy dose of pragmatism.
Okay, let's hear it.
Raw, defiant energy is incredibly potent, but it is not a strategy. Defiance is like a lightning strike. It illuminates the sky, it packs massive power, but it is chaotic and it dissipates quickly.
You can't build a house on a lightning strike.
Exactly. You cannot build a fortune or a lasting legacy on pure anger or defiance. If Marshall Field just stood in the ashes yelling at the sky, Chicago would never have been rebuilt. You have to capture that lightning and route it through a machine. You have to operationalize the desire.
Which means you need a system. Emotion is the fuel, but you need an engine. And that is exactly what the author provides in Key Idea 3, the 6 practical actions.
This is where the philosophy transitions into strict methodology. The author outlines a highly specific, non-negotiable 6-step formula, and it is crucial to understand the purpose of these steps.
It's not just a to-do list, right?
No, it's not just a to-do list for working harder. It is a calculated psychological protocol. The explicit goal is to shift your neurological baseline from what the author terms failure consciousness to success consciousness.
Love that.
It's a method for manually reprogramming your subconscious mind.
I want us to walk through these 6 steps deliberately because the precision of the language matters immensely here. So, step 1, fix in your mind the exact amount of money you desire. It cannot be vague. You can't say, I want to be rich, or I want financial freedom, or I want enough to not worry. It has to be a specific, absolute number.
And the reason for that precision is that the subconscious mind cannot execute a vague command. More money is achieved if you find a quarter on the sidewalk, but that doesn't change your life. A specific number acts as a precise coordinate.
That makes sense. Okay, step 2 is the anchor of reality. Determine exactly what you intend to give in return for the money you desire. Because the universe and the economy operate on the law of exchange. There is no such reality as something for nothing.
Right. You have to define the immense value you are going to inject into the world to justify the number in step 1.
Step 3. Establish a definite date by which you intend to possess the money. This introduces the pressure of time. Without a deadline, a goal is just a fantasy that you'll get to someday.
Someday never comes.
Exactly. Step 4. Create a definite plan for carrying out your desire and begin at once, whether you stand ready or not, to put this plan into action.
I really want to highlight that phrase, whether you stand ready or not. This is the cure for analysis paralysis. Most people wait for the perfect conditions, the perfect funding, the perfect knowledge. The text demands immediate, imperfect action. The plan will evolve, but the momentum must start instantly.
Step 5 is where we start formalizing it. Write out a clear, concise statement summarizing the first 4 steps. You write down the exact amount, the time limit, what you will give in return, and a description of the plan. And then we arrive at step 6, and this is the one that causes the most friction. Step 6 demands that you read this written statement aloud twice daily, once just before retiring at night and once after arising in the morning. And as you read it, you must see, feel, and believe yourself already in possession of the money.
You're right. Step 6 is the psychological hurdle for a lot of readers.
I'm going to be completely honest with you and with the listener. When I first read step 6, I hated it.
Really?
Yeah, my skeptical defenses went into overdrive. If you take this out of context, it sounds like the worst kind of toxic positivity or like the secret style magical thinking.
I totally get that.
The idea of standing in my bedroom in my pajamas, talking to myself out loud, and trying to trick my brain into believing I already have $10 million sitting in my bank account, it feels delusional. I need you to help me bridge the gap here because on its face, this sounds completely unscientific.
It is entirely fair to be skeptical of that, especially given how these concepts have been watered down by modern pop psychology. But we have to look at what is actually happening in the brain during this process.
Okay, I'm listening.
You aren't casting a magic spell to make money appear in your checking account. You are utilizing a very real neurological filtering system.
Walk me through the mechanics of that.
So your brain is constantly bombarded by billions of bits of sensory data every single day. If you consciously processed every sound, sight, and piece of information, you would literally go insane.
Right, too much input.
So your brain has a filter, specifically the reticular activating system, or RAS. Its job is to filter out the noise and only show your conscious mind the information that it deems important or relevant to your survival and your primary focuses. When you engage in step 6, when you read a specific goal out loud twice a day and force yourself to attach deep, visceral emotion to it, you are manually reprogramming the search parameters of your RAS. You are telling your brain this specific target is now a matter of ultimate survival.
Oh, wow. So it's not magic. It's selective attention.
Exactly.
It's like when you decide you want to buy a specific model of a red car, and suddenly you see that exact red car everywhere you go.
Yes.
The cars were always there. Your brain was just filtering them out as irrelevant noise until you programmed the desire into your system.
That is a perfect analogy. By repeating the 6-step statement with emotion, you are working yourself into what the text calls a white heat of desire. Your subconscious mind eventually accepts the goal as an absolute inevitability. And once it accepts it, it starts feeding your conscious mind the resources to achieve it. You suddenly notice the passing comment in a meeting that sparks a business idea. You recognize the Ediphone that everyone else thinks is a dud. You spot the talent in a person that others ignore. You are tuning your receiver to a specific frequency.
And we shouldn't gloss over the historical pedigree of this 6-step formula either. The author didn't just invent this in a vacuum. He explicitly notes that these exact steps were scrutinized and endorsed by Andrew Carnegie,
who at the time was one of the wealthiest and most ruthless industrialists in human history.
Exactly. And they were further validated by Thomas Edison. These were not woo-woo mystics sitting in ashrams. These were hyper-practical, data-driven men who built the physical infrastructure of the modern world.
Right.
If they endorse this method of subconscious programming, we should probably pay attention.
And while the book focuses heavily on financial accumulation, the architecture of this formula is universally applicable. If you strip out the word money and replace it with any definite goal, the mechanism remains flawless.
So if you want to master a complex skill like coding, or if you want to rebuild a broken marriage, or if you want to lose 100 pounds. The structure is the same. Define the exact target. Define the price you will pay in effort and sacrifice. Set a deadline. Start executing today, ready or not, and ruthlessly program your subconscious mind every morning and every night so you don't lose focus.
It forces a terrifying level of clarity. The reason most people fail to change their lives is that their instructions to themselves are painfully vague, like, I want to be in better shape. Your subconscious doesn't know what to do with that. It is an unactionable command.
So the immediate practical application for you listening is clear. Do not treat this as an interesting theory. Treat it as an assignment. Get a physical piece of paper today.
Not a note on your phone.
Right, a physical piece of paper. Write out your 6 steps. Define the exact price you are demanding from life and the exact sweat and blood you are willing to trade for it. Put it on your bathroom mirror and read it tonight before you go to sleep.
Because once you crystallize that plan and you actually begin to execute it in the real world, you are going to hit the next major wall.
And what's that?
You are going to encounter other people. And those people, often highly educated, well-meaning people, will look at your definite plan and tell you that it is functionally impossible.
Which transitions us into the conflict between the practical dreamer and the tyranny of the word impossible.
Yes. Society has a very strange relationship with dreamers. We idolize them after they succeed, but during the process, we mock them. We call them impractical, head-in-the-clouds idealists.
We really do.
But the source text argues fiercely that practical dreamers are the pattern makers of civilization. They are the ones who push the human race forward. But to operate as a practical dreamer, you have to undergo a kind of psychological surgery. You must completely and ruthlessly excise the word impossible from your vocabulary.
The text uses Henry Ford to illustrate this, and the story is legendary. We all know Ford as the pioneer of the assembly line, but this story focuses on his engineering ambition. Ford decides he wants to build a V8 engine. Now, V8 engines existed, but Ford wanted something unprecedented. He wanted the entire 8-cylinder block cast in one single piece of metal.
And we really have to appreciate the metallurgy and engineering constraints of that era. Pouring cast iron into a complex mold with 8 cylinders, dealing with the cooling rates, the cracking, the internal geometries, it was a nightmare.
So Ford brings this mandate to his engineers. And these aren't just mechanics. These are some of the most brilliant, highly trained automotive engineers in the world. They look at the design, they analyze the physics, and to a man, they tell Henry Ford, Mr. Ford, this is physically impossible. The metal won't do it. The molds won't hold it.
And Ford's response is a masterclass in the absolute refusal to accept limitation. He doesn't argue the physics with them. He simply says, produce it anyway.
Just like that. The engineers go to work because he's the boss. They try for 6 months. They fail completely. Another 6 months pass. An entire year of wasted money, cracked engine blocks, and total failure.
Ouch.
The engineers come back to Ford, exhausted. And they basically say, we told you so. We have exhausted every avenue. It is out of the question. It is impossible. And Ford just looks at them with that white-hot desire and says, go right ahead. I want it, and I'll have it.
He forces them back to the drawing board by sheer force of will, and eventually, driven by his absolute refusal to accept their expert verdict, they stumble upon the secret. They figure out the casting process, and they produce the impossible V8 engine, which cements Ford's dominance in the market.
Now, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
I look at Ford's behavior, and a part of me thinks, isn't that just toxic stubbornness? If my boss told me to violate the laws of physics and refused to listen to my expert advice for a year, I'd think he was a tyrant. When is it a burning desire, and when is it just a leader refusing to face reality?
It's a very fine line, honestly, and history only rewards the ones who turn out to be right. But what the text highlights here is the nature of expertise itself. Henry Ford was not a mechanical genius. He had very little formal education. He couldn't do the math his engineers were doing.
Right.
But his genius was his understanding that expertise is often just a comprehensive knowledge of current limitations. His engineers were absolutely correct based on the existing paradigm of metallurgy. But Ford's desire demanded a new paradigm. As the author states, success requires no apologies, failure permits no alibis. Ford didn't care about the alibi of current science. He only cared about the outcome.
It fundamentally changes how you view the word impossible. I love the anecdote about the author himself, who literally bought a physical dictionary, found the word impossible, and cut it out of the book with a pair of scissors.
A very literal approach.
Yeah. When experts say something is impossible, we usually treat it as a law of gravity. But what this story shows is that impossible is almost always just a synonym for we haven't figured it out yet. They are mistaking their temporary lack of knowledge for an immutable law of the universe.
We see this exact dynamic repeated relentlessly throughout history. The text mentions Guglielmo Marconi, the pioneer of radio.
Oh, this story is wild.
It is. When Marconi conceptualized the idea of wireless communication, the idea that you could send invisible messages through the ether over vast distances without any physical wires, he announced it to his friends.
And their reaction is both hilarious and deeply disturbing.
His friends literally had him taken into custody and dragged to a psychiatric hospital to be examined.
No way.
Yes, they genuinely believed he had suffered a psychotic break. The concept of wireless transmission so profoundly violated their understanding of reality that they thought he was clinically insane.
Think about that. You try to invent the precursor to Wi-Fi in the early 1900s, and society tries to throw you in a padded cell.
Huh.
It just goes to show how violently the status quo will defend itself against a practical dreamer.
Exactly. But if we extrapolate this to the present day, the exact same psychological and societal dynamics are at play. If you look at the frontiers of commercial spaceflight or artificial general intelligence or longevity research or quantum computing,
Yeah.
the people leading these fields are constantly being told by traditional experts that their timelines are absurd, their goals are unachievable, and their visions are impossible. But the massive fortunes and the giant leaps for humanity are reserved exclusively for those who are willing to harness the unseen forces of unborn opportunity.
The people who win big look at the current boundaries of human capability and treat them as mere suggestions.
Exactly.
So the takeaway for the listener is clear. When you start executing your 6 steps and your peers, your family, or industry experts look at you and say, that's impossible, it can't be done, you have to reframe that feedback.
Don't let it in.
Right. Do not internalize it as a limit on your potential. Treat it as a reflection of their lack of imagination. You have to be willing to look slightly crazy to the people around you, backing your vision with continuous action until the rest of the world inevitably catches up to what you already see.
Overcoming the skepticism of society is a massive hurdle. But as challenging as that is, it is only the second level of the game.
There's another level.
The ultimate, most profound test of this entire philosophy is what happens when you have to overcome limitations not imposed by society, but imposed by biology and nature itself.
This is where the text moves from incredible business strategy into territory that feels almost miraculous. We are unpacking key idea 5. Transmuting handicaps into equivalent assets.
This is undoubtedly the most aggressive claim the author makes. He asserts that through the power of a burning desire backed by absolute faith, even severe physical adversities and biological handicaps can be transformed into massive advantages.
That's a huge claim.
He claims that nature's mental chemistry simply does not recognize the concept of failure if the desire is strong enough.
The author illustrates this with a story that is deeply personal and highly emotional. It's the story of his own son, Blair Hill. Blair was born with a severe physical affliction. He was born without any external signs of ears.
None at all.
No outer ear structure at all. The medical professionals examine the infant and deliver a devastating verdict. They say the child will likely be entirely deaf and, consequently, mute for his entire life. The biology simply isn't there.
And for almost any parent, that medical diagnosis is a final verdict. You grieve, you accept the reality, and you try to figure out how to give the child the best life possible within the confines of deafness.
Yeah, that's what anyone would do.
But the author, who is entirely saturated in this philosophy of desire, refuses to accept the physician's reality.
He takes the concept of cutting the word impossible out of the dictionary and applies it to his son's medical chart. He makes a silent, bridge-burning pledge to himself. He decides that he is going to surgically transplant his own burning desire for his son to hear directly into the boy's mind.
The mechanism he used to do this is fascinating from a psychological perspective.
How did he do it?
As Blair grew, the father didn't just teach him how to cope with being deaf. He went on the offensive. He used bedtime stories and daily affirmations to plant what he called a white lie in the child's mind. He constantly reinforced the idea that Blair's affliction was not handicap at all, but rather a unique and massive advantage.
I am just staggered by the sheer audacity of that parenting choice. He had absolutely no idea how being born without ears could possibly be an advantage. He had no medical basis for the claim, but he demanded that the boy view it that way.
And because children look at their parents as gods, Blair absorbed this belief completely. He accepted it as absolute truth. He went to school without a trace of self-pity or self-consciousness.
This total absence of an inferiority complex laid the psychological groundwork. And then the physical breakthrough occurs.
Tell them about the phonograph.
Yeah, so when Blair's a little older, the family gets a phonograph, a Victrola. And Blair discovers that if he bites down on the wooden casing of the record player, the sound waves travel through his teeth into his jawbone and bypass the missing outer ear entirely.
It's amazing.
Through the principle of bone conduction, he can hear the music clearly.
The Desire found a physical workaround through the anatomy of the skull. It's incredible.
But the transmutation from a workaround to a true equivalent asset happens later.
Yes. As a young man, Blair is introduced to an early experimental electrical hearing aid. Because his auditory nerve is somewhat functional, the device actually works for him. It opens up an entirely changed world of sound.
Most people would just be thrilled to hear and go live a normal life.
Exactly, but this is where the entrepreneurial desire kicks in. He realizes that millions of other people are suffering from the same isolation he experienced. He doesn't just want to use the hearing aid, he wants to bring it to the world.
He spends a month doing intensive research. He analyzes the market, creates a comprehensive 2-year business plan, goes directly to the manufacturer of the hearing aid, and pitches them on how to reach the deaf community.
And the executives are so blown away by his vision and his personal testimony that they give him a position immediately. He spends his career helping thousands of people hear, ultimately securing his own immense financial and professional success.
It is the ultimate manifestation of the father's white lie. The lack of ears literally became the foundational asset of his life's work. The father planted the seed of desire, but the son executed the plan and reaped the harvest.
That's beautifully put.
The metaphor that keeps coming to my mind is a master of judo.
Oh, I like that.
If you are fighting a massive opponent in judo, you don't try to block their punch with brute force. You will get crushed. Instead, you grab their arm and you use their exact weight and their exact momentum to flip them over and win the match.
That's exactly what happened.
The father didn't teach Blair to block out the reality of his deafness. He used the exact weight of that massive biological obstacle to give his son a unique mission, deep empathy, and ultimately a lucrative career. He threw the opponent using its own mass.
The text actually supports this phenomenon with another brief but powerful story about Madame Schumann-Heink.
Who was she?
She is a young woman who dreamed of being an opera singer. She goes to audition for the director of the Vienna Court Opera, which was the absolute pinnacle of the musical world at the time.
Okay.
The director looks at this awkward, poorly dressed, impoverished girl, listens to her, and delivers a soul-crushing verdict. He tells her, with such a face and with no personality at all, how can you ever expect to succeed in opera? My good child, give up the idea. Buy a sewing machine and go to work. You can never be a singer.
Wow. A brutal, definitive rejection from the highest possible authority in her field.
But her internal white heat of desire simply overpowered his external verdict. She refused to accept his reality. She continued to train, continued to push, and eventually became one of the most celebrated and beloved opera singers of her entire generation.
Both of these stories, Blair Hill and Schumann-Heink, they prove that desire possesses a unique gravity that can overpower seemingly insurmountable physical, biological, or societal limits.
There is a moment in the text where the author pauses to reflect on how this is even possible. He speculates about a mysterious bridge builder of nature. He admits that he doesn't fully understand the granular medical or scientific mechanics of how his son's brain adapted to hear and speak so well despite the missing hardware.
Right, he's not a doctor.
No, but he attributes it to nature stepping in to bridge the gap. It's the idea that when a human mind is utterly saturated with a singular, unyielding desire, it exerts a pressure on reality itself. It forces the universe, whether through bone conduction, the invention of a new technology, or a brilliant business plan, to yield resources and workarounds that defy standard logic.
It really forces us to radically challenge our fundamental understanding of what a limitation actually is.
It does. When the average person faces a severe handicap, whether it is a physical disability, massive debt, a terrible upbringing, or a systemic disadvantage, the default psychological response is defense.
We ask, how can I hide this? Or how can I survive despite this?
We view it as a weight holding us down.
But the practical takeaway from this chapter flips that completely upside down. I want the listener to think about their greatest perceived weakness right now, the thing you complain about the most, the thing you use as your primary alibi for why you aren't where you want to be.
That one thing you always point to.
Exactly. Instead of asking how to cope with it, you have to ask a far more dangerous, exciting question. How can a burning desire transmute this exact weakness into my most profitable, impactful asset? How can I use the exact weight of this obstacle to throw the opponent?
It is an incredibly difficult paradigm shift. It requires you to stop being the victim of your circumstances and start becoming the alchemist of them. But as we have seen, from Edwin Barnes to Blair Hill, that radical shift is the prerequisite for extraordinary achievement.
So let's step back and tie all these incredible threads together into a single cohesive synthesis.
Yeah, if we survey the entire landscape of what we've covered today, from Edwin Barnes riding a filthy freight train to claim a partnership, to Marshall Field standing defiant in the smoking ashes of Chicago.
Terran Ford relentlessly pushing his engineers beyond the bounds of known physics, all the way to a child learning to hear the world without ears.
The soul of this chapter is singular and absolute. Desire is not a passive emotion. It is not a wish you make on a star. It is an active, tangible, organizing force of nature.
It is the engine of reality.
Exactly. When you back a definite goal with a bridge-burning, white-hot obsession, and when you systematize that obsession through daily, programmed action like the 6 steps, you fundamentally alter your own physical presence.
You alter your subconscious filtering system.
You quite literally force the world and the people in it to bend to your will.
It is a heavy, monumental concept, but an incredibly empowering one. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a new thought to chew on as you go about the rest of your day. We talked earlier about the poem where you bargain with life for a penny. If the core premise of this chapter is true, that life will pay you exactly the wage you demand of it with your level of desire, then we have to face a terrifying reality.
What's that?
Look around at your current station in life, your income, your impact, your relationships. If you are unhappy with your circumstances, the hardest pill to swallow is that you might actually just be experiencing the exact physical manifestation of a weak desire.
A profound and unsettling realization.
You aren't a victim of bad luck. You are just currently receiving the exact menial wage you've demanded.
That hits hard.
But it also means you have the power to renegotiate the contract today. You now know how to strike the match and spark a burning desire. But desires is just the spark.
Right.
How do you keep that fire alive when the storms of doubt, fear, and temporary defeat inevitably roll in to put it out? Join us next time as we plunge into the next crucial chapter, how to forge the kind of unshakable faith that makes failure literally impossible.
So what if the only difference between an ordinary, completely fleeting thought and an actual reality-altering force is just a single programmable emotion?
I mean, it completely flips the script on how you experience your own internal monologue, right?
Yeah.
Because if that premise is true, then the thousands of thoughts bouncing around your head right now, they aren't just harmless background noise. They're raw material. They're just waiting for a catalyst.
And that catalyst is exactly what we were hunting for today. Because let's face it, every single person listening to this right now wants something. You might want to break out of a soul-crushing job or build a massive business, achieve financial freedom, or just, leave a meaningful dent in the universe.
Right. Everybody has a goal.
Exactly. But there's this glaring, really uncomfortable tension in the human experience. We all have desires, but only a tiny fraction of us seem to actually possess the internal chemistry to manifest those desires into the physical world.
Yeah, it's like a bottleneck.
Totally. It often feels like a select few are driving these sports cars with a secret engine, while the rest of us are just pushing our cars up a steep hill, completely exhausted, wondering what on earth we're doing wrong.
And today we are looking at a framework that claims to isolate that exact engine.
We are. We're pulling apart the really profound concepts found in the Faith chapter of Napoleon Hill's 1937 classic Think and Grow Rich. And, the promise here is massive.
Oh, yeah, it's huge.
We are going to explore how to systematically generate unshakable self-belief and literally rewrite the code of your subconscious mind. For anyone interested in building something from nothing, understanding this specific psychological mechanism is what transitions you from passively wishing for an outcome to absolutely commanding it.
And that transition from wishing to commanding that is the perfect way to frame it. Because Hill takes this concept that humanity has spent thousands of years treating as, purely mystical or religious or ethereal.
Right, this concept of faith.
Exactly. And he just strips it down to its studs. He rebuilds it as a psychological tool. He treats it as a piece of mental technology that you can operate, regardless of your background or your specific beliefs.
That's where we need to start, I think, because Hill calls faith the head chemist of the mind. Now, I love a good metaphor, but we really need to ground this.
Let's do it.
So if I'm like sitting in traffic right now and I'm daydreaming about starting a software company, that thought just feels like a thought. It's a raw ingredient. How does this head chemist actually change the nature of that thought?
Well, to understand the head chemist, you really have to look at how Hill defines the laboratory itself, which is the mind. He views the human mind as an active processing plant.
Okay.
In his framework, faith is absolutely not a passive hope. It's not a rigid dogma where you just fold your hands and blindly wait for the universe or some deity to deliver a software company to your doorstep.
Right, you're not just waiting around.
Exactly. Instead, faith is an active, highly programmable state of mind. It acts as the head chemist because it fundamentally alters the molecular structure of an ordinary thought.
So my daydream about the software company sitting in traffic is just an inert chemical. It's sitting in a beaker, essentially doing nothing.
Right. Hill argues that a normal, unemotional thought, what he calls a vibration of thought, is finite, is entirely limited to the confines of your own skull.
It has no real power.
None. It has no power to move you, let alone move the world around you. But when you introduce the emotion of faith to that thought, the head chemist goes to work.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this.
Yeah, the blend of thought and faith creates something entirely new. Hill says it translates that finite thought into its spiritual equivalent. And this is the absolute crux of his entire philosophy. He states that this emotionalized, faith-infused thought is the only form of thought capable of inducing a response from what he calls infinite intelligence.
Okay, let's pause right there. Infinite intelligence. Because for a modern, intelligent audience, that phrase can immediately trigger the woo-woo alarm.
Oh, absolutely.
It sounds like something you'd read on a neon sign in a psychic's window. In the text, he describes it as this unifying force of the universe, this overarching source of power and knowledge. But if we want to apply this practically today, how do we interpret infinite intelligence without losing the plot? Are we talking about the universe or God or something we can map onto modern psychology?
It's basically the ultimate Rorschach test of the book.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, depending on your worldview, infinite intelligence can easily be mapped to God, the universe, a higher spiritual power, whatever. But if we look at it strictly through the lens of modern neuroscience and psychology, it maps remarkably well to things like the reticular activating system, or RAS, in your brain.
Combined with the collective network of human opportunity. Right.
Exactly.
Unpack the RAS connection for the listener, because I really think that grounds this whole concept beautifully.
Sure. So the reticular activating system is this bundle of nerves at our brainstem, and its job is to filter out unnecessary information so the important stuff gets through.
Because there's just so much data.
Right. At any given second, your brain is absolutely bombarded with millions of bits of data. Sights, sounds, opportunities, the micro expressions on people's faces.
If you processed all of that consciously, you would go insane.
You would completely short circuit. So your RAS filters the world based on what you have programmed it to care about. When Hill talks about sending a faith-infused thought out to infinite intelligence and getting plans or hunches passed back to you, modern science would basically say you have successfully programmed your RAS.
So by attaching the intense emotion of faith to my goal of starting a software company, I've told my brain's filter, hey, this is paramount.
Yes. And suddenly, you start noticing the exact people, the resources, the passing conversations that can help you build that company.
Things that were always there.
Always there.
Yeah.
But your brain previously filtered them out as background noise.
It's the classic red car syndrome.
It's exactly.
You decide to buy a red car, and suddenly every third car on the highway is red. The universe didn't magically spawn more red cars. Your filter changed.
That's a perfect analogy.
So if an unemotional thought is just you looking at a red car in a magazine, faith is the mechanism that programs your brain to actually hunt for it out in the real world. That completely removes the mystical barrier for me. You are altering your biological risk tolerance, your body language, your pattern recognition.
Right, because when you walk into a room with that level of a conviction, other people unconsciously pick up on it.
You literally alter human interactions, which then forces the environment to respond to you.
It's a total hijacking of the human operating system. You're changing your internal frequency, which changes your external behavior, which in turn changes the opportunities the world offers you. But Hill goes even further into the chemistry of this.
He does, yeah.
He doesn't just stop at the word faith. He actually lists the specific emotional ingredients that make this reaction the most potent.
This is the part of the source material that caught me completely off guard. We go from talking about business goals and infinite intelligence to like a very intense emotional cocktail. He names 3 specific emotions.
Yeah, he claims that the emotions of faith, love, and sex are the 3 most powerful positive emotions available to the human experience.
Right.
And when these 3 are blended, they color a thought so intensely that it just shatters any barrier to that infinite intelligence. Or, in our modern framing, totally overrides the subconscious filters.
I have to admit, seeing sex thrown into the middle of a chapter about faith and getting rich is a total record scratch. It feels like a massive pivot.
It definitely raises eyebrows.
But he has a very specific structural reason for pairing these 3, right?
He does. And honestly, it's brilliant when you break down the psychology. Hill categorizes love and faith as psychic or spiritual emotions. They are transcendent.
Like they pull you upward.
Exactly. Toward higher ideals, connection, purpose. But they can also be somewhat ethereal, or detached from physical action. Sex, on the other hand, is the most primal biological driving force in nature.
It is pure, raw, physical creation and survival energy.
Yes. So he's basically saying that if you only use love and faith, you might end up as like a monk on a mountain. Highly enlightened, sure, but not necessarily building a tangible business or moving the physical world.
And if you only have the physical drive, you are just running on base animal instinct without any higher direction.
Precisely. When you mix them the highest spiritual aspirations with the deepest, most potent biological drive, you bridge the gap between the infinite and the physical. You're aligning the mind, the spirit, and the body into one singular vector of force.
It makes complete sense. I mean, if you want to achieve something massive, you can't just think about it with your prefrontal cortex. Spreadsheets, logics, step-by-step business plans, they're necessary, but they are completely inert.
They have no voltage.
Exactly, no voltage. If you are listening to this right now and you're trying to figure out why your perfectly logical career plan isn't working, Hill is telling you it's because you haven't given it any voltage.
You're trying to drive a car with a map, but no fuel.
Yes. You have to find a way to love the pursuit, to have this unwavering faith in the outcome, and to pour your vital, creative, biological energy into it. A thought backed by that combination isn't a passive wish. It is a burning demand.
And that demand is the only thing the subconscious mind actually respects. The subconscious doesn't care about your spreadsheets,
Yeah.
It responds to emotion, which brings us to the most difficult hurdle in this entire philosophy.
Right, because everything we just discussed sounds great in theory. Just mix faith, love, and creative energy and you'll be unstoppable.
Easy, right?
But let's be real. If someone listening to this is staring at an empty bank account or dealing with a failing business or stuck in a really toxic job, trying to conjure up faith feels like asking a drowning person to just, feel like they are on dry land.
It's a massive cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, if you do not have the raw materials for belief, how can you possibly manufacture this chemical reaction?
Well, that exact paradox is what led Hill to formulate the core mechanism of this chapter, which brings us to key idea number 2, autosuggestion.
Autosuggestion.
Yeah, autosuggestion is the bridge over that exact gap. It is the literal how-to for developing faith where it absolutely does not exist yet.
Autosuggestion, meaning, self-suggestion. The way I read this, it's essentially the art of subconscious deception.
That's a really provocative way to put it,
Yeah.
but mechanically it's pretty accurate.
Right.
Autosuggestion is the agency of communication between the conscious mind, which is the part of you that is acutely aware of your empty bank account, and the subconscious mind, which is the seat of action and reality creation. Hill views the subconscious mind as a highly receptive but entirely literal machine.
Like a factory.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It does not argue with you. It doesn't look at your bank account to fact-check your thoughts. It simply takes whatever blueprint you hand to it in a state of intense emotion, and it begins building it into physical reality.
But this is where the friction is for me. Hill tells us that to use autosuggestion, we have to conduct ourselves just as we would if we were already in possession of the material thing we are demanding.
He literally says to see and feel yourself already in possession of the money.
Yes. And if I'm struggling to make rent, acting like I have millions in the bank feels delusional. It feels like I'm gaslighting myself. How do we cross the bridge from feeling like a complete liar to achieving actual reality-altering belief?
You really have to look at it less like gaslighting and more like installing a software patch.
Okay, I like that.
Think of your current mindset, the belief that you are broke and always will be broke, as legacy code. It's an old operating system running on your mental hardware. If you try to just upload a new line of code that says, I am wealthy, the old system is going to reject it as a virus.
It'll flag it as an error.
Right. Error. Bank account is currently empty.
So the conscious mind acts as the firewall, rejecting the new belief.
Yes. The firewall fights it. But autosuggestion is the process of brute forcing that new line of code through the firewall, through relentless, emotionalized repetition.
Just hammering it in.
Exactly. You have to repeat the new code so many times and with so much emotional intensity that the operating system eventually accepts it as the new baseline reality.
You know, I think of it like a method actor.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, a truly great method actor doesn't just read the lines on a script. If they are playing a king, they don't just stand there and say, I am the king. They adopt the posture of a king. They change their breathing. They build a false emotional history of growing up in a palace.
They embody it.
Right. They stay in character so intensely and for so long that their brain actually forgets their real identity for a while. Their physiological responses change, like their heart rate literally changes based on the fictional reality they've constructed. Hill is basically telling the listener to be a method actor in the movie of their own future.
That is a phenomenal analogy. And it aligns perfectly with Hill's instructions. When you write down your goal, you can't just read it like a grocery list.
I want to be rich. I want a promotion.
Yeah, that does absolutely nothing. You have to embody the character of the person who's already achieved it. Because the subconscious mind does not know the difference between a real event and an event that is intensely imagined and emotionalized.
And that is a scientifically backed statement today. We know from modern neuroscience that if you vividly visualize an action, the exact same neural pathways fire in your brain as if you were actually performing the action.
Elite athletes use this constantly.
All the time. Skiers will visualize an entire downhill run, twitching their muscles exactly as they would on the snow. Their brain is experiencing the run as reality.
Exactly. And the athletes aren't gaslighting themselves, right? They're conditioning their nervous system for an inevitable outcome.
Wow.
Autosuggestion is mental conditioning. But here is the critical warning Hill issues, and it's something every listener really needs to internalize. This law of autosuggestion is completely neutral.
Neutral. Like gravity.
Yes, exactly like gravity.
Yeah.
It doesn't care if you're a good person or a bad person, and it certainly doesn't care if your blueprint is positive or negative.
It just builds whatever blueprint you hand it.
Yes. And if you don't deliberately hand it a blueprint of faith and success, it will default to the ambient noise of the world. And let's be honest, what is the ambient noise of the world?
Fear. Doubt.
Unbelief.
Cynicism. So if you're like sitting around worrying about losing your job or obsessing over how bad the economy is and just dreading the future, you are actively using autosuggestion.
You are a master of autosuggestion. You're just using it to destroy yourself.
That is wild.
Hill points out that if you fill your mind with fear and doubt, the subconscious mind takes that as the blueprint. It takes your fear of poverty, assumes that is the reality you are demanding, and translates that into its physical equivalent.
Which is misery, failure, stagnation.
Right. He explicitly notes that just as a person can become a criminal through constant association with crime, a person develops faith by voluntarily associating their mind with it. But if you voluntarily associate your mind with failure, you will become a failure.
That is genuinely terrifying. I mean, if you are listening to this right now, think about what you were worrying about right before you started this deep dive. If you are dreading your 9 to 5 or stressing about a client who might cancel or feeling imposter syndrome, your subconscious is taking those feelings, assuming they are the goal, and actively hunting for ways to validate them.
It's using your reticular activating system to find evidence of why things are going wrong.
It's using your own brain to find evidence of why you suck. It is actively building your failure.
Because the subconscious mind will not remain idle. It is a garden. If you do not deliberately plant the seeds you want, the wind is just going to blow weed seeds into the soil and weeds will grow.
So the immediate practical shift for the listener here is to start acting as if. Do not wait for the perfect business plan or the perfect moment to start believing in yourself.
That is completely backward.
You have to demand the outcome in your mind first. You have to force the software patch through the firewall. You convince your subconscious that the goal is already a reality. And I think this is the crucial part of the mechanism. You stay on high alert for the plans, the hunches, the sudden flashes of inspiration that your subconscious will inevitably hand back to you.
And when those hunches arrive, you act. Autosuggestion isn't just sitting in a dark room wishing for $1 million and waiting for a check to appear in the mail.
Right. It's not the lottery.
No, it's programming the mind so that when the opportunity for $1 million idea flashes in your periphery, you actually have the drive, the vision, and the absolute lack of hesitation required to execute it.
Action is the final step of the chemical reaction. Okay, so we understand the mechanism, autosuggestion. But how exactly do we run this program day by day? How do we build this discipline when our attention spans are completely shattered by modern life?
It's tough.
This brings us to a very mechanical, literal part of Hill's chapter. Key idea 3, the 5-step self-confidence formula.
I love this section because Hill just completely stops dealing in theory and gives a literal written contract for the mind. It is a specific routine designed to induce the state of faith. We should definitely walk through it because the psychological friction a person experiences during each of these steps is very revealing.
Yeah, let's break it down. Step 1. Hill writes, and I quote, "I know that I have the ability to achieve the object of my definite purpose in life. Therefore, I demand of myself persistent, continuous action toward its attainment, and I here and now promise to render such action."
Notice what he places at the absolute beginning. He doesn't start with the money or the fame or the house. He starts with agency and action.
Right. I have the ability.
He forces you to sign a mental contract, acknowledging your own ability and demanding persistent action from yourself. The friction here is taking absolute responsibility. You are eliminating the excuse of luck, circumstance, or other people.
It's a commitment to forward motion above all else. If you stop moving, the formula breaks.
Exactly.
Okay, step 2. He says, I realize the dominating thoughts of my mind will eventually reproduce themselves in outward physical action and gradually transform themselves into physical reality. Therefore, I will concentrate my thoughts for 30 minutes daily upon the task of thinking of the person I intend to become, thereby creating in my mind a clear mental picture.
30 minutes daily of pure visualization.
Honestly, in today's world, sitting in a room without a phone, without a podcast, without music, and just holding a single vivid mental picture of your future self for 30 minutes, that is excruciatingly difficult.
It sounds like psychological torture for the modern brain.
Most people can't wait 30 seconds for a microwave to finish without checking Instagram.
I know, I do it too. But that friction is the point. The brain is like a wild horse. It wants to buck and run in 100 different directions. By forcing it to hold a single image of the person you intend to become for 30 minutes, you are breaking the horse.
And shaming it.
You are establishing dominance over your conscious mind, which is required to pass the blueprint down to the subconscious. You are basically engaged in deep structural neuroplasticity.
You are carving the groove in the record deeper and deeper so the needle stops skipping.
Great analogy.
All right, step 3. I know through the principle of autosuggestion, any desire that I persistently hold in my mind will eventually seek expression through some practical means of attaining the object back of it. Therefore, I will devote 10 minutes daily to demanding of myself the development of self-confidence.
So on top of the 30 minutes of visualization, here is 10 minutes of active demand.
Wow.
This is the verbal or internal repetition of your goals. This is the brute force software patching we talked about earlier. 40 minutes a day, total, dedicated entirely to mental architecture.
It really emphasizes that faith isn't a gift. It's a full-time job.
It's work.
Step 4. I have clearly written down a description of my definite chief aim in life, and I will never stop trying until I shall have developed sufficient self-confidence for its attainment.
The emphasis here is on the physical act of writing it down. It is the first moment where the thought moves from the ethereal realm of your mind into the physical realm.
Ink on paper.
Exactly, it's a kinetic connection. The brain processes written goals differently than spoken or thought goals. It signals a level of permanence and absolute commitment.
I'm completely with him up to this point. Steps 1 through 4 are an intense, highly focused system of self-optimization.
Very focused on the individual.
It's all about me, my brain, my goals, my visualization, my definite chief aim. But then we hit step 5, and this is where I have to push back a little. Let me read step 5.
Go for it.
I fully realize that no wealth or position can long endure unless built upon truth and justice. Therefore, I will engage in no transaction that does not benefit all whom it affects. I will succeed by attracting to myself the forces I wish to use and the cooperation of other people. I will induce others to serve me because of my willingness to serve others. I will eliminate hatred, envy, jealousy, selfishness, and cynicism by developing love for all humanity because I know that a negative attitude toward others can never bring me success. Here is my issue with this.
Right. What is it?
This is a formula for self-confidence. It's a book about getting rich. Why does step 5 suddenly read like a manifesto for global harmony? Let's not be naive. Business is often a zero-sum game. Competitors exist. Market share is fought over fiercely. If I want to build an empire, shouldn't I be ruthlessly focused on crushing the competition? Why is he injecting this seemingly moralistic requirement into a psychological formula?
I'm so glad you brought this up because it's probably the most misunderstood part of Hill's philosophy. People assume Think and Grow Rich is just this manual for ruthless, unbridled greed. But Hill's inclusion of Step 5 isn't him acting from a moral high horse. It is a psychological necessity.
Right.
Yes, it is the fail-safe for the entire engine.
Unpack that. How so?
Let's go back to the chemistry of the subconscious mind. We established that it responds to the emotions you feed it, taking them literally, right?
Right.
Well, what happens if you are building your wealth through exploitation, deception, or a ruthless zero-sum mentality? To act that way, day in and day out, you have to generate emotions of cynicism, selfishness, paranoia, and jealousy.
You have to view everyone as a threat or a mark.
Exactly. And what does your literal factory-like subconscious do with those emotions? It takes them as the blueprint. If you feed it cynicism and paranoia, you are poisoning the well. You are programming your mind for isolation, conflict, and eventual destruction. Hill argues that a negative attitude toward others guarantees failure, not because the universe will punish you morally, but because your own subconscious will build a reality of constant threat. Furthermore, massive success requires the cooperation of other people.
And high-level talented people don't want to cooperate with a ruthless, cynical jerk.
They really don't.
They might work for you briefly out of necessity, but they will never give you their loyalty or their best ideas.
Precisely. You must induce others to serve you because of your willingness to serve them. This is the shift from a zero-sum mindset to a positive-sum mindset. The self-confidence Hill is demanding isn't the arrogance of a tyrant. It's the quiet, unshakable certainty that you are providing immense, undeniable value to the world, and therefore the world will gladly reward you.
That reframes everything for me. True self-confidence requires a clean conscience. Because if you are ruthlessly exploiting people to make a dollar, somewhere deep in your subconscious, you know you are a fraud.
You know it.
You know you are operating on a house of cards. That underlying guilt or fear of exposure acts as a counter-blueprint. You might be visualizing success for 30 minutes a day, but your subconscious fear of being found out is running 24/7, and that fear will eventually manifest as self-sabotage.
That is the exact mechanism. You cannot have absolute, unwavering faith if your internal foundation is fractured by guilt or malice. The internal battle of will is won by those whose minds are clear, singular, and focused on positive creation. In the text, Hill actually includes a poem to illustrate this internal state.
Oh yeah, the poem.
It's famous, but it hits differently when you understand the mechanics behind it. The last stanza is, life's battles don't always go to the stronger or faster man, but sooner or late the man who wins is the man who thinks he can.
The man who thinks he can. That implies a total 100% absence of internal doubt or conflict.
And you cannot achieve an absence of doubt if your subconscious is at war with your conscience.
So the practical, actionable takeaway for the listener here is incredibly clear. You need to write down your goal today. You need to do the 40 minutes of visualization and affirmation. But as you define your goal, you must explicitly, logically link it to the value it provides to other people.
It has to be connected.
Your self-confidence has to be rooted in mutual benefit. If your goal is to make $10 million, you have to clearly define what service, product, or innovation you are going to give to the world that is actually worth $10 million to them. If you skip that step, your subconscious will ultimately reject the goal as illegitimate.
That is the only way to build faith that will endure over decades. Because faith, as Hill sees it, isn't just an internal solitary experience meant to keep you happy in your living room. And this is where the chapter takes its most fascinating turn.
Yes, this brings us to key idea 4, the scale of faith. So far, we've discussed autosuggestion and faith as a personal operating system, a way to hack your own brain. But Hill broadens the scope massively here. He takes it from the individual to the collective.
He elevates faith to the ultimate leadership force in the world. He makes a really bold claim. Faith is the cornerstone of every great movement in human history.
That's a big statement.
It is. He cites the foundational leaders of major religions: Christianity, Islam, Confucianism, Hinduism. And it is vital to note that he isn't making a theological argument here. He is making a psychological and structural argument about how human beings are influenced. He is stating that faith is the universal law of influence.
This was the part of the text that really made me stop and reread. To prove his point about influence, he uses a specific historical example that feels totally alien in a book about accumulating wealth.
It really does.
He dedicates significant time to Mahatma Gandhi. When I read that, my immediate reaction was, what is a man who famously owned no clothes, no money, and no property doing as the prime example in a capitalist playbook? What is the connection between Gandhi's life and a philosophy built for entrepreneurs?
It is a brilliant, striking contrast. Hill uses Gandhi intentionally to strip away all the physical trappings of power. He wants to show you the raw, unadulterated power of faith, completely divorced from money, military might, or political office.
Right.
Hill points out that Gandhi wielded more actual power than any military force on earth at the time. He challenged and effectively defeated the British Empire, which was the greatest physical power in the world. And he did it without a single gun or a single dollar.
How does Hill explain the mechanics of that? If Gandhi had no army and no bank account, how did that power actually manifest?
Through the ability to transplant his faith into the minds of others. Hill argues that Gandhi's power was purely psychological. Gandhi had engineered such an absolute, unwavering belief in his definite purpose, which was the independence of India through nonviolence, that his faith became contagious.
Contagious.
Yes. Hill notes that Gandhi was able to transplant his faith into the minds of 200 billion people, causing them to coalesce and move in unison as a single, unstoppable mind.
Moving 200 million people as a single mind? That is staggering. The scale of that is almost impossible to comprehend.
It is the ultimate manifestation of what Hill calls the mastermind principle, which he weaves throughout the entire book. When a leader possesses absolute faith, it doesn't just program their own reticular activating system. It literally alters the psychological environment of everyone around them.
It acts like a broadcast signal.
Exactly. When a leader communicates that faith clearly, persistently, and without a shadow of doubt, it overrides the fear and doubt in the minds of the followers.
This connects perfectly to the historical context of when this book was written. I mean, Hill published Think and Grow Rich in 1937, right in the aftermath of the Great Depression. The entire world was paralyzed by fear.
Exactly. Hill applies this Gandhi principle directly to the economy of his time. He notes that widespread fear paralyzes business completely. The factories were still there.
Right. The buildings hadn't vanished.
The raw materials were still there. The workers were still there. But the wheels of industry stopped because employers, bankers, and employees alike were all infected with a collective blueprint of fear.
Everyone expects to fail. The banks expect defaults, so they stop lending. The employers expect a crash, so they stop hiring. The consumers expect poverty, so they stop spending. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy driven by collective negative autosuggestion.
A collective hallucination of failure. And how do you break a collective hallucination?
You need a disruptor.
You need a leader who operates with such intense, engineered faith that they can shatter the paralysis. True leadership in business, whether in 1937 or today, isn't just about managing logistics, optimizing supply chains, or reading balance sheets. You can hire people to do that.
Right, that's just management.
The irreplaceable job of the leader is to transplant their unwavering belief in the mission into the minds of the team. You have to unify disparate individuals under a shared, emotionalized faith.
I think this is the most critical lesson for any entrepreneur or manager listening right now. You cannot motivate a team with spreadsheets. You can show them the math, you can show them the quarterly projections, you can give them 100 logical reasons why the strategy should work. But if they don't believe in the vision on a visceral level, if they haven't internalized the emotion of the goal, they will scatter the moment things get hard.
The first sign of trouble, they're gone.
Exactly. The moment a competitor launches a better product or funding dries up, a team running on logic will panic. A team running on faith will adapt and fight.
Because logic allows for doubt. Faith, by Hill's definition, is the deliberate exclusion of doubt.
So if you lead a team, whether it's 3 people in a garage startup or 3,000 people in a corporation, your primary job isn't operations. Your primary job is to be the generator of faith.
You are the power source.
You have to engineer your own belief using the 5-step formula so intensely and so genuinely that when you walk into a room, it spills over. Your conviction has to be the anchor that keeps your team from getting swept away by the ambient fear of the market.
That is the essence of this chapter. Faith is a force that moves not just your own subconscious, but the collective subconscious of an organization, a market, or even a nation. It is the invisible architecture of all human achievement.
Okay, let's step back and look at the massive landscape we've covered today. We are at the synthesis stage of our deep dive.
Let's bring it all together.
We started by exploring faith as the head chemist, the catalyst that takes an ordinary thought, blends it with powerful emotions like love and primal creative energy, and translates it into a frequency that the universe or your brain's reticular activating system just cannot ignore.
Right, it turns a passive thought into an active demand.
Then we unpacked autosuggestion, confronting the really uncomfortable reality that you have to aggressively overrate your own limiting beliefs, effectively acting as a method actor in your own life until the subconscious accepts the new reality.
And we walk through the demanding discipline of the 5-step self-confidence formula, highlighting that mental architecture requires serious daily time. 40 minutes of visualization in demand.
40 minutes, yeah.
And we stressed that true, lasting confidence can only be built on a foundation of providing value to others. A zero-sum mindset will eventually sabotage you through subconscious guilt.
And finally, we scaled it up. We looked at Gandhi and the Great Depression to understand that faith isn't just a personal self-help tool. It is the ultimate weapon of leadership. It is the ability to transplant your vision into the minds of others and move them as a single force.
If we have to tie all of this nuance, all of this psychology and history into one clear, memorable insight that represents the soul of this chapter, it is this. Faith is the eternal elixir of life.
The eternal elixir.
It is not a lottery ticket. It is not a divine gift bestowed upon a lucky few. It is a mechanical, programmable state of mind that you actively, fiercely engineer through repetition, visualization, and emotion.
It is the bridge.
Yes, it is the only bridge between a fleeting thought in your finite mind and the infinite possibilities of the physical world.
Yeah.
Without that bridge, your greatest ideas are trapped in your head.
They just stay as daydreams.
With it, they are forcefully translated into reality. Ultimately, deliberate engineered faith is the only known antidote for failure.
Which brings us to you, the listener. What does all of this mean as you take off your headphones and step back into your reality? We established early on that the law of autosuggestion is neutral and it is constantly working.
It never turns off.
Never. That means your subconscious is currently building your reality based on whatever thoughts, emotions, and anxieties you are feeding it right now. It is a literal factory and it is churning out your future at this exact second.
The machinery never sleeps.
So take a hard, honest look at your life today. Look at your career trajectory, the state of your business, the quality of your relationships, and your baseline anxiety levels. Is your current reality the product of a mind meticulously programmed by deliberate, engineered faith? Or is it the product of a mind left on autopilot, absorbing the fears, the doubts, and the cynicism of the news cycle and the people around you? Because you are manufacturing chemistry either way. The factory is running. The only question is whether you are deliberately brewing the elixir of success or passively drinking the poison of defeat.
It really forces a reckoning. It asks you to take absolute responsibility for the code you are writing into your own mind. What blueprint will you hand to your subconscious tonight?
That is the question you have to answer. Now that you know how to program the mind with faith, the next step is learning how to amplify that power exponentially, because you can only generate so much voltage on your own. Join us on our next deep dive, where we'll explore how to take that raw, engineered belief and organize it with other minds into a mastermind, a collective intelligence that literally forces the world to open its doors for you. What if the greatest barrier to your success isn't actually your education or your bank account or, the economy? What if it's just the quiet, invisible script playing on repeat in your own mind?
Right, because we spend an enormous amount of capital, both time and money, just trying to optimize our external circumstances.
Yeah,
We
exactly.
buy new software, we take courses, we're always networking, we are constantly tweaking the hardware of our lives, right?
Yeah.
But we completely ignore the operating system running quietly in the background, dictating literally every decision we make.
And that operating system is really the singular focus of our analysis today. We're doing a deep dive into this concept of autosuggestion.
It's a huge topic.
It really is.
Yeah.
Within the source material we're dissecting today, autosuggestion is presented as the crucial, non-negotiable medium for communicating with your subconscious mind.
Absolutely non-negotiable.
Right. So for anyone invested in business, entrepreneurship, or really the attainment of any major, seemingly impossible goal, this deep dive is essentially the ultimate masterclass.
Yeah, we're looking at the specific blueprint for how to actively program your brain to hunt for opportunities.
Transforming those vague, fleeting desires into tangible wealth and actual actionable plans.
Exactly. And the premise here relies really heavily on understanding how the mind processes stimuli,
Hmm.
both internal and external.
So it's not magic.
No,
No.
not at all. Autosuggestion isn't framed as some mystical concept here. It's defined quite clinically in the text. It encompasses all suggestions and all self-administered stimuli that reach the mind through the five senses.
Okay, through the five senses.
Right. It is the literal agency of communication.
Hmm.
It's the physiological and psychological bridge between the conscious reasoning mind and the deep operating machinery of the subconscious.
Okay, let's unpack this. Think of the conscious mind as like a bouncer at the door of an incredibly exclusive nightclub.
I love this analogy.
Right, and the nightclub itself, specifically the VIP section in the back, is your subconscious mind. That VIP room is where your fundamental beliefs live. It's where your habits are forged and where the decisions that actually chart the course of your life are made.
The real heavy lifting.
Exactly. So your conscious mind is the bouncer standing at the velvet rope, supposedly checking IDs. And the text argues that nature has given humans absolute control over what passes this bouncer. Like we have the inherent authority to dictate the guest list.
We do. But what's fascinating here is the critical vulnerability in human nature, according to the source. Most people rarely exercise this control.
They just let the bouncer slack off.
Exactly. The bouncer has the authority, but he's essentially fallen asleep on his stool. And because the subconscious mind, that VIP section, doesn't filter for quality on its own, it just accepts absolutely whatever the conscious mind lets through the door.
Wow.
It's an amoral execution engine, doesn't judge the data, it just processes it.
So if the bouncer is asleep, anyone can just wander in. Like a negative comment from a passing coworker, or a terrifying headline about a market crash, or even just a localized failure you experienced like 10 years ago.
Yep, they all just waltz right past the velvet rope and take a seat in the VIP section.
The text actually uses a very deliberate agricultural metaphor here, which I think is great. It compares the subconscious mind to a remarkably fertile patch of garden soil.
Right, and a garden doesn't care what you plant in it.
No, it really doesn't.
It will grow nightshade and poison ivy with the exact same vigor and efficiency as it grows tomatoes or corn. So if you do not intentionally sow the seeds of desirable crops, your specific goals, positive thoughts, deliberate ambitions, the environment will ensure that weeds grow in abundance.
Because nature hates a vacuum.
Exactly. The weeds are the fears, the doubts, and the pervasive poverty consciousness that just permeates everyday life. A garden never just stays empty. If you aren't planting, the wind is blowing random seeds into the soil every second of every day.
So the tragedy of neglect is that you are constantly being programmed, whether you consent to it or not.
That's the scary part, yeah.
If you fail to plant your actual defined desires, your subconscious feeds on whatever random fear-based thoughts reach it through just the daily friction of living. Every conversation, every piece of media, every passing anxiety is a seed.
And this framing places a tremendous burden of responsibility on you, on the individual. The environment is relentlessly hostile to a cultivated gardening.
Oh, absolutely.
You are surrounded by external stimuli designed to trigger fear, insecurity, complacency, because, well, those emotions are highly effective for capturing attention.
Right, they sell ads.
Exactly. So, if you aren't actively standing at the gate, scrutinizing every thought, and deliberately introducing your own chosen seeds, the weeds will inevitably choke out any accidental positive growth.
But wait, let me push back on this a bit, because if we are entirely immersed in an environment that constantly broadcasts negativity, just deciding to be the guard seems almost biologically impossible.
It is incredibly difficult.
Like if you're working a miserable job, you're surrounded by cynical people and struggling to pay rent. The sensory data feeding into your conscious mind is just overwhelmingly negative. Standing at the velvet rope and simply commanding the negativity to stay out feels like trying to hold back the ocean with a broom.
It does, but, the text anticipates that friction. It doesn't present this as an easy, instantaneous shift where you suddenly just block out all negativity.
Right, it's not a magic switch.
No, it presents it as a mechanical capacity that must be trained. It requires deliberate, sustained, and honestly often exhausting effort to wake the conscious mind up and enforce a strict guest list.
You have to train the bouncer.
Exactly. And you aren't just blocking the negative. The actual mechanism involves intentionally flooding the subconscious with the thoughts you want it to process, leaving no room for the weeds to take root.
Okay, so that brings us to the actual mechanics.
Yeah.
How do we actually forge a VIP pass for our deepest desires?
This is where it gets practical.
Right. Because if we want to guarantee the bouncer lets the right thoughts into the subconscious, we have to look at the specific language we use, and infinitely more important, the delivery system of that language.
Yes.
The text outlines 6 specific action steps for transmuting a desire into reality. Things like fixing the exact amount of money or the specific goal, determining exactly what service you'll give in return, setting a rigid timeline, creating a plan, and reading this written statement aloud twice daily.
And this is where the vast majority of people attempting to utilize this philosophy just fail completely.
Oh, really? Why?
Well, the text provides a massive explicit warning right at this juncture. Merely reading the words of your desire aloud is of no consequence whatsoever.
Wait, really? Just reading it isn't enough?
No. Reading a statement off a piece of paper, even if you do it every day for 50 years, will yield 0 desirable results if those words are unemotional.
Wow. Okay, the text highlights the Emile Coué formula to illustrate this,
There's
right?
Coué.
Coué was a psychologist who had his patients repeat the mantra, day by day, in every way, I am getting better and better.
A classic.
Yeah. But the source material argues that you could parrot that phrase millions of times, and without the injection of genuine emotion, specifically the emotion of faith, it is just inert noise. The subconscious mind is entirely deaf to plain, unfeeling dictionary words.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this explains why so many modern affirmations fail so spectacularly.
Oh yeah, like the TikTok trends.
Exactly. People write positive affirmations on their bathroom mirrors or listen to them in the car on the way to work. I am a successful entrepreneur. I am a millionaire.
Right.
But they recite these phrases as an intellectual chore. It's just checking something off a morning routine list.
Just going through the motions.
Exactly. The subconscious mind does not process intellectual abstractions. It processes somatic, emotional reality. The text refers to this requirement as mental chemistry.
So, what does this all mean? Emotion is basically the solvent that allows the thought to penetrate the subconscious. Without the emotion, the word is a dry pill you just can't swallow.
That's a great way to put it.
And faith is identified as the strongest, most productive catalyst. But, and here's my question, asking someone to simply generate the emotion of faith, especially if their current physical reality is the exact opposite of their goal, that feels like an immense psychological hurdle.
It's a huge hurdle.
Like if someone is broke, standing in front of a mirror reciting a script about being wealthy, their reasoning mind is screaming that they are lying. Generating the feeling of wealth in the midst of poverty sounds like a total paradox.
It is a paradox and, well, the text doesn't offer a shortcut around it. It states explicitly that you cannot cheat the process.
No shortcuts.
None. The toll required to bypass your own logical doubt is everlasting persistence. You're attempting to overwrite decades of deeply ingrained neural pathways.
Right, so it's going to feel fake at first.
Absolutely. At first, the conscious mind will completely reject the affirmation. It will feel like play acting. You'll feel silly.
Yeah.
But the mechanism of autosuggestion relies on the principle that through relentless, emotionally charged repetition, the brain eventually tires of the cognitive dissonance and begins to adopt the manufactured feeling as a baseline reality.
It makes me think of like the stark difference between reading a recipe out loud and actually cooking and eating the meal.
Oh yeah, go on.
I can read 1 cup of flour, a teaspoon of vanilla, bake at 350 degrees aloud 10 times. My subconscious doesn't care.
Yeah.
It doesn't trigger my salivary glands. It doesn't satisfy my hunger.
No, it's just words.
Exactly. The subconscious only understands the sensory, emotional experience of actually smelling the vanilla, feeling the heat of the oven, and tasting the sugar. The text is demanding that we provide the subconscious with the emotional taste of the goal before the physical goal actually exists.
That analogy perfectly isolates the biological mechanism at play here. The nervous system catalogs intense emotional and sensory experiences as high-priority data.
Okay.
By deliberately manufacturing the sensory and emotional experience of already possessing your goal, feeling the relief, the pride, the specific tactile sensations of success, you trick the subconscious. You trick it into cataloging that imagined future as a present, high-priority reality.
Okay, so once we understand that emotion is the fuel, how do we direct that fueled-up thought so the subconscious actually catches it? Because the source material provides a highly specific technique for this, right?
It does. It requires an intense form of concentration that goes far beyond standard visualization.
Right. You're instructed to close your eyes and fixate on the exact amount of money or the exact parameters of the goal until you can literally see the physical appearance of it in your mind's eye.
But visualizing the reward is only half the equation, and honestly, it's the half that most superficial interpretations of this text focus on.
Like The Secret, right? Just picture a Ferrari, and it appears.
Exactly, which the text completely rejects. Crucially, it is adamant that you must simultaneously see yourself rendering the service or delivering the merchandise you intend to give in exchange for that money. It strictly enforces a reality that there is no something for nothing.
I love that. That requirement grounds the entire philosophy in reality. It separates actionable autosuggestion from idle daydreaming.
Huge difference.
Because anyone can close their eyes and visualize a mansion or a luxury car, and,
Yeah.
that just releases a cheap hit of dopamine that tricks your brain into thinking you've already achieved something, which actually kills your motivation.
Yes, dopamine without effort is a trap.
Exactly. The text demands that you visualize the grueling late nights, the specific value you are building for clients, the sweat equity that justifies the reward. You have to visualize the sacrifice.
By locking the visualization of the reward together with the visualization of the specific labor required to earn it, you create a complete circuit.
A complete circuit.
Right. You are programming the subconscious not just to desire a destination, but to actively build the necessary road to get there. This leads directly to what the author terms a legitimate trick.
The legitimate trick. I want to talk about this.
You are instructed to trick your subconscious mind into believing that you absolutely must have this money or this goal, that it is already awaiting your claim, and that the subconscious is therefore obligated to hand over practical plans for acquiring it.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We are essentially talking about weaponizing cognitive dissonance.
Yes, weaponizing it.
By creating a scenario of absolute, uncompromising necessity in your mind, framing the goal not as a preference but as a survival imperative,
Yeah.
you force the brain's reticular activating system into overdrive.
It's brilliant, really.
It is, because the brain hates unresolved tension. If you convince it that you must have this specific outcome, it starts desperately scanning your environment, your memories, and your skills for the missing pieces to resolve that tension.
And the psychology parallels the techniques used by elite actors.
Oh, like method acting.
Exactly. The Stanislavski system, often referred to as the magic if, requires an actor to trick their own nervous system into experiencing genuine physiological responses. Real tears, real accelerated heart rates, based entirely on a fabricated scenario.
Wow, yeah.
They ask, what would I do if this situation were real? The text is effectively commanding the reader to method act their own future success.
Because the subconscious doesn't know the difference.
Right. Because the subconscious mind cannot distinguish between a vividly imagined, highly emotional event and an objective physical event. It accepts the manufactured reality and begins operating under its parameters.
And what if the listener's goal isn't money? What if it's getting a promotion or finishing a novel? How does the legitimate trick apply there?
The mechanism scales to any objective, regardless of whether it involves a specific dollar amount. The trick remains identical.
So same process.
Exactly. If the goal is writing a novel, you visualize the finished bound book. You feel the weight of the paper. But simultaneously, you method act the process of sitting at the keyboard, pushing through the agony of writer's block, and rendering the service of writing.
You convince your subconscious that this story already exists in its entirety.
Right, that is a physical necessity that it be extracted, and you demand the subconscious provide the plot structures and the discipline to finish the work.
Okay, so you've tricked your subconscious and demanded a plan, but where does that plan actually come from? Because you don't sit down and logically figure it out, right? You have to bypass your own logic.
Yes. Once that demand is lodged firmly in the subconscious, the text introduces its most counterintuitive directive regarding how the actual plan of action is generated.
What is it?
It explicitly instructs the reader. Do not trust your reason when creating the plan.
See, instructing someone to abandon their reasoning faculties when attempting to build wealth or achieve a complex goal, that contradicts every metric of traditional education and business logic.
It flies in the face of everything we're taught.
Right. We are trained to rely exclusively on reason, data analysis, and empirical forecasting.
But the text argues that the human reasoning faculty is inherently faulty, limited, and often profoundly lazy. Very lazy. Reason is entirely bound by past experiences, historical data, and known constraints. If you rely entirely on conscious logic to formulate a plan for a massive, unprecedented leap in your life, reason will immediately supply 1,000 logically sound arguments for why the goal is impossible.
You don't have the money, you don't have the degree.
Exactly. It will point out your lack of capital, your lack of specific credentials, and the statistical likelihood of failure.
So reason is essentially a survival mechanism designed to keep you safe. And safe usually just means maintaining the status quo.
Exactly.
Reason is the voice that looks at a massive ambition and says, well, let's be realistic.
And the text argues that depending on reason is a guaranteed path to mediocrity and disappointment.
So what do we do instead?
Instead, you are instructed to demand and expect the plan to arise from the subconscious, flashing into the conscious mind as an inspiration, an intuition, or a hunch.
A hunch. The source material describes this phenomenon as the sixth sense, right? Characterizing it as a direct telegram or message from infinite intelligence.
Yes, infinite intelligence. And this raises an important question about how we interpret that. A reader can approach it from a spiritual perspective, seeing it as a connection to a divine or universal mind.
Sure.
Or, alternatively, it can be viewed through a strictly neurological lens. The subconscious mind processes an incomprehensible volume of data points, recognizing patterns and synthesizing disparate pieces of information far beyond the capacity of the conscious mind.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Right. So the telegram is simply the moment that immense background processing finally compiles a cohesive solution and pushes it into your conscious awareness.
That sudden flash of insight, that's a universal human experience. It's the classic shower thought.
The shower thought, exactly.
You wrestle with a complex logistical problem at work for 3 weeks, making spreadsheets, running pros and cons, using your reason to batter away at the problem, and you get absolutely nowhere.
Nowhere.
Then you stop thinking about it, you go for a run, or you're on the verge of falling asleep, and the complete, elegant solution just drops into your mind, perfectly formed.
You didn't reason your way to it.
No,
Yeah.
your subconscious handed it to you.
The text emphasizes that these flashes of inspiration are the blueprints you must follow. However, it attaches a severe condition to these telegrams.
Uh-oh.
When the inspiration hits, you must put it into action immediately. The source dictates that failure to act on that hunch is literally fatal to success.
But wait, isn't it dangerous to blindly follow a hunch without thinking it through? Demanding immediate action on a 3:00 a.m. hunch sounds incredibly reckless.
It sounds crazy.
Yeah. If I wake up in the middle of the night with a sudden inspiration to, I don't know, liquidate my retirement account and invest in a highly speculative niche business venture, my reason is the only barrier preventing financial ruin. Blindly following intuition without running it through a logical stress test seems like a recipe for disaster.
And that reaction perfectly illustrates the tension between the conscious and subconscious mind we were just talking about.
Right.
But the text's directive to act immediately is predicated entirely on the groundwork laid in the previous steps. This is not a random, chaotic impulse born of boredom or panic.
Okay.
This hunch arrives only after weeks or months of intense, focused concentration, emotional charging, and specifically the rigorous visualization of rendering a service of value.
Oh, I see.
The subconscious has been strictly programmed with the exact parameters and constraints of your goal. Therefore, the inspiration it delivers is highly targeted and calibrated to those constraints.
So the hunch is the output of a very specific algorithm you've spent weeks coding. If you've been obsessively visualizing, providing incredible value to a specific market, the hunch that arrives isn't going to be go gamble your savings. It's going to be a specific insight on a product adjustment or a new distribution channel.
Precisely. The danger the text is warning against is the tendency of the conscious reasoning mind to instantly attack the hunch.
Because it's new and scary.
Because the subconscious solution often requires stepping outside your comfort zone or defying conventional wisdom, your reason will immediately attempt to talk you out of it out of fear.
Right.
So when the text commands immediate action, it is instructing you to move before the fearful, analytical mind has time to invent excuses, spray weed killer on the newly sprouted idea, and rationalize inaction.
Okay, that clarifies it. To make these telegrams of inspiration a regular occurrence rather than a rare accident, the text provides a strict daily physical routine to follow.
Yes, the routine is key.
This actionable blueprint is where the philosophy moves from abstract theory to daily labor. And the instructions are hyper-specific. Go to a quiet spot where you won't be disturbed, specifically recommending doing this in bed at night. Close your eyes and repeat aloud the written statement of your goal, the timeline, and the service you intend to render.
You are instructed to repeat this process night and morning until you can clearly visualize the objective.
Night and morning.
Furthermore, you must place a written copy of this statement where you can see it upon waking and right before sleeping, reading it until it is completely memorized.
It's a lot of repetition.
It is, but the specific timing mandated here in bed at night and immediately upon waking is neurologically optimal for reprogramming the brain.
Right, because we are targeting the brain during very specific transitions in consciousness, aren't we? The hypnagogic state as you drift into sleep, and the hypnopompic state as you are pulled out of it.
Exactly. During these borderland states between wakefulness and sleep, the brainwave activity shifts from the rapid beta waves of alert consciousness down into alpha and theta waves.
What does that actually mean for the bouncer?
Well, the outer guard we discussed earlier, the analytical, skeptical, critical faculty of the conscious mind, is essentially powered down. It lacks the energy to scrutinize and reject ideas. In these narrow windows, the subconscious mind is exposed and highly receptive to direct suggestion. You are bypassing the bouncer while he is heavily sedated.
The routine takes advantage of a biological loophole.
A massive loophole.
But, the physical act itself, lying in the dark, eyes closed, speaking aloud to an empty room about future wealth or monumental achievements, it feels inherently ridiculous.
It really does.
The conscious mind, even when tired, rebels against the absurdity of it. It feels foolish, like a game of pretend. You're telling me to sit in bed, eyes closed, talking out loud to myself like a kid?
And the author is fully aware of how absurd the exercise feels to a socialized adult. The text addresses this friction directly, instructing the reader to carry out the routine as though they were a small child.
Oh, wow.
You are explicitly told to inject the blind, uncritical faith of a child into the effort.
That makes total sense because children don't possess a developed critical faculty. When a child plays pretend, their physiological reality aligns entirely with the game.
Yes.
They aren't burdened by statistics, historical precedent, or a sense of adult propriety. The text is demanding that we deliberately suspend our adult cynicism.
Cynicism and skepticism are the default settings of the adult mind, right? They are the armor we wear to prevent disappointment.
Right.
But that same armor blocks the absorption of new, expansive beliefs. The text guarantees that if you follow the instructions, pushing through the initial feelings of foolishness and skepticism, the sheer force of repetition will eventually replace that skepticism with belief.
And that belief crystallizes into absolute faith.
Exactly. The text actually quotes William Ernest Henley's poem Invictus. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul.
A powerful line.
It is. The underlying argument is that mastery of your fate is utterly impossible unless you first master the ability to influence your own subconscious machinery.
And the instructions also require an intense level of physical engagement with the source material itself. It demands that the reader read the specific chapter on autosuggestion aloud every single night until they are thoroughly convinced of its soundness, instructing them to underscore sentences with a pencil as they read.
Yes. The physical engagement is crucial.
It's a total rejection of passive consumption. You cannot just listen to a summary or skim the pages. The acts of speaking, hearing your own voice, tracking the words visually, and underlining them physically force the brain to engage multiple sensory pathways simultaneously, driving the concepts deeper into the neural architecture.
It is a multimodal approach to programming. By engaging the vocal cords, the auditory cortex, and the physical motor skills of writing, you are commanding the full attention of the nervous system.
Leaving no bandwidth for the conscious mind to wander or inject doubt.
Exactly.
So synthesizing the depth of this chapter reveals that autosuggestion is really the absolute keystone and the arch of this entire methodology.
Without a doubt.
If a burning desire is the initial spark, and faith is the combustible fuel, autosuggestion is the engine block and the steering wheel. It is the deliberate, unrelenting, daily practice of bypassing your own cynical intellect to hardwire a new reality into your subconscious.
Right. By forcibly marrying intense, manufactured emotion with the vivid, uncompromising visualization of both the ultimate reward and the grueling work required to attain it, you're reprogramming your brain's reticular activating system.
You transform your mind into a heat-seeking missile calibrated for opportunity.
Beautifully said. You train it to pull the necessary blueprints out of the ether, out of your own background processing, demanding that it hand over the plans required to bridge the gap between where you are and what you have commanded it to achieve.
It is a process of total psychological subjugation. You force the subconscious to accept the goal as an absolute non-negotiable fact. And once that acceptance occurs, the subconscious machinery begins working tirelessly, 24 hours a day, filtering every interaction, every piece of data, and every environment for the tools needed to manifest that fact into physical reality.
But the inescapable truth of the text is that this mechanism is always running.
whether you want it to or not.
The law of autosuggestion operates continuously, without your conscious consent. It does not possess a moral compass. It works with equal, devastating efficiency, whether you are programming it for monumental success or absolute failure.
And that is the most provocative and unsettling reality we have to confront today. Consider the involuntary autosuggestion you are actively participating in at this very moment.
Oh, this is the hard truth.
Every time you casually complain about being broke or the economy, every time you verbalize a doubt about your own competence, every time you consume media designed to make you feel powerless and enraged, you are perfectly executing the law of autosuggestion in reverse.
You're planting weeds.
You are bypassing your own guard and planting invasive, toxic weeds deep in your own fertile soil. You're demanding that your subconscious find evidence to prove that you are destined to fail, and your subconscious will faithfully deliver that evidence.
You are literally handing the bouncer a VIP list populated entirely by your worst fears, and you are doing it with the exact emotional intensity required to ensure they take up permanent residence in your mind.
The ultimate question the text poses is one of agency. Will you continue to allow the environment to haphazardly program your mind, or will you take control of the gate tonight? What if you intentionally selected the seeds you plant in that hypnagogic state before sleep?
That's the challenge.
Because once you assume that control and your mind begins demanding a plan, you will inevitably encounter a new barrier.
Right, the next hurdle.
What happens when the telegram arrives? The plan is clear, but it requires skills and expertise you simply do not possess. How do you bridge the gap of your own ignorance? Stick around, because in our next deep dive, we are tackling the fourth step to riches: specialized knowledge.
That's going to be a good one.
We will explore exactly how to identify, acquire, and leverage the precise information you need to execute the plans your subconscious has just handed you. But until then, interrogate the invisible script playing in your head. Take the wheel. Keep the bouncer awake.
What you just listened was the beginning of a full audio, way longer, explaining every single chapter of the book. If you would like to keep listening to the end and access to the full audio, you can access it with the link down below in the description and in the pinned comment.